Three armed men, one woman being dragged toward a black SUV, and a busboy with no weapon, standing alone in a Los Angeles parking garage at 11:17 on a Tuesday night. Most men would have kept walking. Nathan Mercer is not most men. What happened in the next 40 seconds would change everything. For him, for his daughter, and for a world that had no idea how close it just came to the edge. This is a story about the cost of hiding, the price of showing up, and what happens when the life you buried refuses to stay dead. Stay with me until the end. Hit like, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Belamo restaurant on West 3rd Street was the kind of place that made people feel like they'd earned something. Dark wood paneling, candles that actually flickered, a wine list that ran 4 pages long. The kind of place where a $40 entree arrived on a plate the size of a hubcap with 3 bites of food arranged like modern art. Nathan Mercer had been clearing those plates for 11 months. He didn't mind the work. That was the honest truth, even if it surprised people who found out. And nobody found out, because Nathan didn't talk about himself. He moved through the dining room like furniture moves through a house, noticed only when it's in the way. He learned the rhythms of the place fast. Table 6 always needed extra bread. The bar side ran hot on Fridays, and the customers got loud by 9. The head chef, a compact Greek man named Stavros, threw towels when he was angry and bottles of sparkling water when something went right. And both happened with equal frequency. It was ordinary. It was repetitive. Nathan had chosen it on purpose. He'd been through a period, after Sarah died, when ordinary felt like something you watched through glass. He'd stand in the cereal aisle at the grocery store and forget why he was standing in the cereal aisle. He'd drive halfway to the base before remembering he'd already resigned his commission. The military doesn't prepare you for grief the way people think it does. It prepares you for loss in the abstract, for the possibility of death, for sacrifice as a concept. But it doesn't prepare you for coming home to a house that smells like someone who is no longer in it. Lily had been 6 when her mother died. She was 8 now. She was the reason Nathan got out of bed every morning, which sounds like a cliche until you understand that it wasn't a figure of speech. Some mornings, it was purely mechanical. Alarm at 6, feet on the floor, one foot then the other, because Lily needed breakfast and she needed someone to walk her to school, and she needed someone to be there when she got home. The need was the engine. He ran on it. Their apartment was small and on the 4th floor of a building on Hayworth Avenue that had a busted elevator 3 weeks out of every month. The landlord was a guy named Dennis who responded to maintenance requests with the energy of a man being asked to donate a kidney. The apartment had 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom and a kitchen window that looked directly into another building's kitchen window, close enough that Nathan had accidentally made eye contact with his neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Okafor, while she was making oatmeal at 6:15 in the morning, and they'd both done that very human thing of pretending it hadn't happened. Lily had decorated her room with drawings of horses and 1 large poster of the solar system that she'd gotten at the Natural History Museum. She was precise about things. Her pencils were always sharpened, her backpack always packed the night before. She got that from her mother. She had Sarah's eyes, too, that particular shade of brown that caught light differently depending on the time of day. And sometimes Nathan would look at her at breakfast and feel something move through his chest that he had no name for. He worked dinner shifts at Belamo 5 nights a week. The hours worked because Lily went to after-school care until 5:30, and he could drop her with Mrs. Okafor on the evenings she stayed late. Mrs. Okafor had a cat named Ptolemy and unlimited patience, and Lily adored her. The arrangement felt fragile in the way that everything in Nathan's life felt fragile. Like a structure built from mismatched materials that somehow held as long as you didn't look at it too hard. On the night everything changed, Nathan was working the late side of a Tuesday shift. The restaurant had thinned out by 10. A foretop of entertainment industry people near the window, loud and self-congratulatory, running through their 3rd bottle of Barolo. A couple celebrating something. Anniversary, maybe? First date, maybe? The way they were leaning across the table suggested something new and nervous. A woman at the bar working through a glass of white wine and a document folder, reading with the focused expression of someone who brought work everywhere and had made peace with that. Nathan was bussing table 9, stacking plates, folding linen, moving efficiently, when he heard the raised voice from outside. Not a shout. More like a sharp interruption. The kind of sound that registers in a particular part of the brain before the conscious mind has processed it. He paused. Through the restaurant's front window, across the sidewalk and into the open mouth of the parking structure beside the building, he could see movement, shadows shifting wrong. A woman in a dark blazer pulling back against something. Against someone. He set down the plates. Stavros was going to be irritated about the table. Nathan walked to the side exit anyway. The parking structure was 3 levels, attended during business hours, unattended after 9. The entrance was a wide concrete mouth that exhaled the smell of oil and exhaust. Nathan walked in off the street and stopped. She was maybe 30 feet ahead of him. Dark blazer, dark hair pulled back, a leather portfolio bag twisted in her grip. 3 men arranged around her in the specific geometry of people who've done this before. One close, one behind, one at an angle that cut off movement toward the street. The close one had a hand around her upper arm. He was saying something low and insistent. The woman said, clearly and without volume, "Get your hand off me." The man's response was to tighten his grip. Nathan took in the scene in approximately 2 seconds. The 3 men were fit and dressed plainly, nothing flashy. Dark clothes, no logos. The one in back had a shape under his jacket on the left side. The one at the angle was holding a set of keys that he wasn't using to open any car. The close one was the talker, which meant he was also the decision maker, which meant he was probably the most dangerous. Nathan was still holding a dinner plate. He'd grabbed it automatically when he'd moved, the way your hand picks up your keys without being told to. He looked down at it. White ceramic, good weight, 9 inches across, the remnants of someone's roasted chicken still on it. He put it down on the trunk of the nearest parked car without making a sound. Then he picked up 2 more plates from a busing cart someone had left near the elevator. A cart from the restaurant, apparently wheeled out here for some reason he didn't stop to understand, and he walked toward the 3 men. "Hey," his voice was conversational. "Either of you guys order the duck confit?" All 3 turned. The close one, the talker, assessed Nathan in a fraction of a second and dismissed him. Busboy uniform, no weapon, slight smile like he'd wandered in from somewhere. "Get lost," the talker said. "Sorry, man. Just trying to figure out whose table this goes back to." Nathan took 2 more steps closer, which put him at 15 feet, and tilted the plate slightly, apologetic posture, harmless. "The lady looks like she's in a hurry too. Maybe she knows." The woman met his eyes. He saw something register in her face, not relief, not yet, more like recalibration. The talker started to say something else. Nathan threw the first plate like a frisbee, flat and fast, and it caught the man on the angle directly across the bridge of his nose. The sound was immediate and ugly. The man dropped, and the keys hit the concrete floor with a bright metal clatter. Nathan was already moving. 3 fast steps, and he drove his elbow into the talker's throat as the man was starting to turn, weight behind it, the kind of strike you don't pull back from. The talker went down, making a sound like a door hinge. The man in the back had his hand inside his jacket. Nathan threw the second plate, not at the man, at his face, a distraction, and closed the distance in 2 strides. He caught the gun hand at the wrist before it cleared the jacket, twisted hard in a direction wrists don't go, and used the man's own momentum to put him face first into the side of a Toyota Camry. The gun skittered across the concrete. 40 seconds, maybe less. The parking structure was quiet except for the echo of the Camry's alarm, which had started bleeding from the impact. Nathan stood with his chest moving and looked at the woman. She was staring at him. The leather portfolio was still in her hand, white-knuckled. A strand of hair had come loose from wherever it had been pinned. "Are you hurt?" Nathan asked. She took a breath. "No." A pause. "Are you a busboy?" "I was." He looked down at the man at the angle, who was conscious but not moving, both hands over his nose. At the talker, who was on his side making the hinge sound. At the man who'd gone into the Camry, who was sitting against the tire not going anywhere. "You should call the police. Don't touch anything." "Wait." He walked back through the parking structure entrance and out onto the street and back through the side exit of the restaurant and went to finish table 9. His hands weren't shaking. That was the part that bothered him later, the part that told him something he didn't want confirmed. Whoa, her name was Victoria Langford, and by 10 the next morning she was in every business news feed that mattered. Nathan was making Lily's lunch, peanut butter, no jelly, sliced apples, the same thing she'd asked for every school day for 6 months, when he saw the headline on his phone. Langford Clean Energy, CEO, escapes kidnapping attempt. He read the first paragraph and set the phone face down on the counter. Dad? Lily was at the kitchen table working on something in a notebook. She was in a phase of drawing elaborate maps of fictional countries, complete with rivers and mountain ranges and population centers. What's the capital of a country that's mostly ice? Depends on what the people who live there care about, Nathan said. She considered that seriously. They care about fish. Then probably somewhere on the coast, good fishing access. She went back to her notebook. Nathan finished the apple slices and put the lunchbox in her backpack and thought about not thinking about the parking garage. He'd left before the police arrived. He'd heard the sirens starting about 2 blocks away when he stepped back inside, and he'd gone straight to the service entrance and walked 3 blocks east and taken the bus home. He knew it looked bad, leaving the scene. He also knew what happened when a guy with his history showed up in police reports. Names went into databases. Databases got searched. He'd worked very hard for 11 months to be no one. Victoria Langford was apparently someone, very specifically someone, the founder and CEO of Langford Energy Systems, a company that had been making headlines for 3 years for a next-generation battery technology that was supposed to change the economics of renewable energy storage. She was 30 years old. She'd taken over her father's company at 24 after his death, rebuilt it from a mid-size energy consulting firm into something that serious people took seriously. The news article described her as one of the most closely watched figures in clean technology. Nathan put the phone in his pocket and walked Lily to school. The day passed the way days passed. He slept for a few hours. He worked nights, slept mornings, had gotten used to it. He picked up Lily at 3:30. She showed him the map, which now had a capital city called Isenfjord that she'd drawn with a harbor and what appeared to be a very large fish market. He told her it was excellent urban planning. She agreed. He got to Belamo at 5:30 and found Stavros in the kitchen wearing the expression of a man who had questions. "Your table 9, Stavros said. The plates were left stacked on a car. On a car, Nathan. Do you know how that looks? Sorry, something came up. Something came. Stavros stopped, looked at Nathan with the careful attention of a man who had spent 30 years reading dining rooms and had learned to read other things in the process. You saw the news. I saw it. That woman, the one from the parking garage. Stavros crossed his arms. The police came this morning, asking about restaurant employees. Nathan was quiet. I told them everyone was inside all night, Stavros said, which is what I believe to be true because I don't know anything different. He held Nathan's eyes for a moment. You understand me? Yeah, Nathan said. I understand you. Good. Stavros threw a towel, the angry signals, at the counter and turned back to his prep station. Table 3 has a hen party coming in at 7. They're going to be insufferable. Try to smile. Nathan tied his apron and went to work. She found him at 9:15. He was coming out of the kitchen with a busing cart when he saw her at the host stand. Dark blazer again, different one, her hair down now, talking to the hostess with the focused energy of someone accustomed to getting what they asked for. The hostess pointed toward the back of the restaurant, and Victoria Langford turned and looked directly at Nathan and walked toward him without hesitation. She sat down at the nearest empty table like she owned it, which Nathan thought was probably how she sat everywhere. Sit down, she said. I'm working. I know, sit down anyway. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat because the alternative was to make a scene, and scenes were the opposite of invisible. Up close, she looked like someone who'd had a very long 24 hours. There were shadows under her eyes that weren't entirely concealed, and the way she held herself was careful in the way that people hold themselves when something hurts, and they're not admitting it. You dislocated 2 of my attackers and broke one man's nose with restaurant plates, she said, without getting touched once, in under a minute. How'd you find me? I described you to a police sketch artist and ran the composite through a private facial recognition service I pay for because I've had stalkers before. She said it flatly. Special operations background, I'm guessing. The way you moved, that wasn't training you get at a gym. I don't know what you're talking about. Nathan Mercer, formerly of SEAL Team 6, retired on a compassionate hardship discharge following the death of your wife, Sarah Mercer, 18 months ago. She folded her hands on the table. You have an 8-year-old daughter named Lily. You've been working here for 11 months. You have no social media presence, no online footprint, and you pay for almost everything in cash. A pause. I'm not trying to threaten you. I'm trying to tell you I already know, so you don't have to spend energy pretending. Nathan looked at the table. There was a water ring on the white linen from a previous guest. He thought about Stavros, who'd lied to the police for him that morning. What do you want? He said. Someone tried to kidnap me last night. It wasn't about ransom. She leaned forward slightly. 3 days ago, a prototype of our core battery technology disappeared from our R&D facility. Our lead researcher was found dead in his car in Pasadena. They staged it as a cardiac event. He was 41 years old and had the blood pressure of a 20-year-old. Her voice was steady, but he could hear what steadiness was covering. I have a board of directors who think I'm overreacting. I have a security team that I no longer trust completely, and I have people who are trying to kidnap me to get access to the rest of the technology. You need a security firm, Nathan said. A real one. I can give you 3 names. I've been through 2. The first one had a leak that nearly got me killed in Denver 4 months ago. The second one, she stopped. I don't know yet, but the fact that 3 men knew my location last night, knew which car I was driving, knew I'd be coming out that side entrance. That information came from inside somewhere. She looked at him directly. I need someone who isn't connected to any of it. Someone with no relationship to my company, my board, my industry. Someone whose only motivation is, no, Nathan said. She blinked. I haven't finished. I know what you're going to say. And the answer is no. He stood up. I have a daughter. She's 8. She needs a parent who comes home. He picked up the busing cart handle. I'm sorry about what happened to you. I'm sorry about your researcher. Call the FBI. The FBI is involved, Victoria said. Someone is feeding them disinformation. They spent 2 weeks investigating the wrong division of my company. She didn't raise her voice. I'm not asking you to be a soldier, Mr. Mercer. I'm asking you to help me figure out who inside my company is trying to destroy it. That's it. That's not it, Nathan said. That's never it. He pushed the cart back toward the kitchen. She didn't call after him. He thought about it for the rest of the shift. He thought about it on the bus home. He sat on the couch in the dark apartment while Lily slept and thought about the fact that a woman's researcher was dead at 41, staged to look like a heart attack, which took resources and patience and a specific kind of cold-blooded professionalism that he had encountered before and that he did not like to think about. He also thought about the way the 3 men in the parking garage had been positioned. It was professional work, the kind of positioning you learned somewhere specific. He went to bed at 2 in the morning and didn't sleep. At 6, he was making breakfast when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. They followed me home last night, Victoria said when he picked up. No preamble. And this morning when I drove Lily to school, you don't know where my daughter goes to school. I told you, I already know. A pause, and for the first time something in her voice fractured slightly at the edges. They were parked outside your building this morning, Mr. Mercer. A gray sedan, 2 occupants, plates registered to a shell company in Nevada. They were there when I drove past at 6:45. Nathan was at the kitchen window. He looked down at the street. He couldn't see a gray sedan from this angle. They know who you are now, Victoria said quietly. They saw your face on the parking garage camera. They will run the same kind of search I ran. If I found you in 12 hours, they'll find you in 24. Nathan put the phone down on the counter without hanging up. He went to Lily's room. She was still asleep, one arm over the edge of the mattress, her hair spread across the pillow. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he went back to the kitchen and picked up the phone. Okay, he said. Okay, what? I'll help you figure out what's happening inside your company. That's it. Nothing beyond that. He kept his voice low. And my daughter doesn't get involved. Not one step closer to her. Agreed, Victoria said. I'm serious. So am I. Another pause. Can you meet me this morning? I need to make arrangements for Lily first. Of course. He hung up and stood in the kitchen. The coffee maker beeped, finished. He poured 2 cups out of habit, one for himself, one that he didn't drink, but that he still poured, a habit from a marriage that had ended in a hospital room 18 months ago. He stood there with both cups and looked at the window where the morning light was coming in gray and flat over the rooftops of Hayworth Avenue. He told himself he was done with this. He'd meant it when he said it. The problem was that done with it didn't mean it was done with him. Victoria's office occupied the top 2 floors of a building in Culver City that had once been a film studio and still had a certain theatrical quality to its architecture. High ceilings, large windows, exposed concrete that had been sandblasted to look intentional. The company occupied both floors with the orderly intensity of a place that believed it was doing important work and had not yet stopped believing it. Nathan arrived at 10:15. He'd dropped Lily at school and called Mrs. Okafor and given her a cash amount that he hoped communicated urgency without causing alarm, and asked if Lily could stay with her that afternoon and evening. Mrs. Okafor had said yes, which was what Mrs. Okafor always said, and Nathan had felt a complicated gratitude for it. Victoria met him at the elevator. She was dressed differently today. No blazer, dark slacks, and a simple shirt, her hair back again. She looked like she'd gotten some sleep, but not enough of it. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Don't thank me yet." He looked around the lobby as they walked. "How many people in this building know about the stolen prototype?" "Officially, my security team, the senior research staff, the board." "Unofficially?" She glanced at him. "Probably everyone who works here. We're not actually very large, about 200 employees total." "Who had physical access to the R&D facility the night the prototype disappeared?" 22 people with active credentials. We've narrowed it to 11 who actually badged in during a 4-hour window." "And your researcher, Marcus Hale?" Her jaw tightened slightly. Marcus had been with the company since the beginning. He was one of my father's original hires. She pushed open a glass door and led him into a conference room. He was also the only person besides me who fully understood every component of what we built. The conference room had a long table and one wall that was entirely windows looking out over Culver City. There were folders on the table and a laptop open to a security camera grid. Nathan pulled out a chair but didn't sit. He moved to the window first, checked the sight lines automatically, an old habit he'd mostly broken, mostly. "Walk me through the battery technology," he said. "Not the technical details. The value. Why would someone steal it instead of buy it?" Victoria sat down and folded her hands on the table. "The technology is called Helix 7. It's a solid-state battery system that stores and releases energy at a rate roughly 6 times higher than anything commercially available, which means renewable energy becomes practical at grid scale," Nathan said. She looked at him. "I read," he said. "Keep going." "Right." Something shifted slightly in her expression. Reassessment, maybe. "The technology is worth somewhere between $40 and $80 billion in licensing alone, depending on how quickly it can be manufactured at scale. But the reason someone would steal it instead of acquire it legitimately is that it can't be acquired legitimately. My father built in legal protections that tie the core IP to the company's charter in a way that makes hostile acquisition nearly impossible." She paused. "The only way to use the technology without buying the company outright, which would trigger regulatory scrutiny and take years, is to steal the prototype and reverse engineer it. Or take you. Or take me. Yes. I have documentation in my own head that doesn't exist anywhere else." She said it matter-of-factly. "My father was paranoid about data security. He taught me to be the same way." Nathan turned from the window. "Tell me about your father." Victoria was quiet for a moment. The light from the windows was hitting the side of her face, and she looked tired in a way that was different from not sleeping. A deeper kind of tired, the kind that comes from carrying something for a long time. "His name was Daniel Langford," she said. "He died 6 years ago. Officially, cardiac arrest. He was 62. She met Nathan's eyes. "He was also former military, defense intelligence specifically. He left that world when I was 10 and never talked about it." Nathan sat down. "And you're telling me this because the shell company that owns those Nevada plates?" She turned the laptop toward him. On the screen was a corporate registry search. It traces through 3 holding companies to a parent entity that was dissolved in 2019. But before it was dissolved, it had one government contract, Department of Defense, Special Activities. Nathan looked at the screen for a long moment. "My father left that world," Victoria said quietly. "I think it didn't leave him." The room was quiet. Outside the window, a plane was crossing the sky in a slow diagonal, leaving a thin white line that began to dissolve almost immediately. "I need the full personnel files for everyone on your senior research team," Nathan said. "I need the security footage from the night Hale died, not the official copy, the original server logs. And I need to know who on your board has been pushing hardest to settle this quietly." "That last one's easy," Victoria said. "His name is Richard Caulfield. He's been on the board for 4 years, and he's been trying to get me to take a buyout offer for 2 of them." "From who?" "He's never said directly." She closed the laptop. "But the offer always comes through the same intermediary, a consulting firm in Vienna." Nathan thought about men in parking garages who knew which exit someone would use. He thought about a researcher dead at 41 of a cardiac event that nobody questioned. He thought about the gray sedan outside his building this morning, and about his daughter asleep with her arm over the edge of the mattress. "One more thing," he said. "What?" "The people who tried to take you last night, the way they were positioned, the triangulation, cutting off the exit before she started moving." He chose the pronoun deliberately, the clinical distance of it. "That's a specific methodology. It's taught in about 4 places in the world. One of them is a facility in rural Virginia that I've been to." Victoria looked at him steadily. "I know. You knew already." "I suspected," she said, "which is why I needed someone who'd recognize it." She held his gaze. "And why I needed someone they couldn't buy." Nathan looked at his hands on the table. There was a scar across his left knuckle from a door in a building in a country he didn't think about anymore. He'd gotten it not from combat, but from the door closing unexpectedly. A completely stupid injury, and Sarah had laughed when he'd told her. She had the specific laugh of a woman who loved you and also found you absurd, and the memory of it hit him sometimes without warning. He pushed back from the table. "Let's start with the security footage," he said. They worked through the afternoon. Nathan was not an investigator by training. His skill set had lived in the space between planning and kinetics, in the specific discipline of going through a door when the door needed going through. But the military teaches pattern recognition in ways that cross-apply. You look for the thing that's wrong. You look for movement where there should be stillness, stillness where there should be movement. The security footage was 12 hours of coverage across 4 camera angles. Victoria pulled it up on a monitor in a small auxiliary office she'd given him access to. No window, which he preferred, and he went through it methodically while she brought him coffee that he drank without commenting on. At hour 4, he found something. At 2:17 a.m. on the night of the theft, a service elevator in the R&D wing registered an access event. The camera covering that elevator showed nothing. A blank frame, 8 seconds of gray static, then normal feed resuming. 8 seconds, he said. Victoria leaned over his shoulder at the monitor. She smelled like something clean and uncomplicated. The footage glitches sometimes. The building's camera system is older. 8 seconds is specific, not a glitch. A glitch runs irregular. This is a clean cut. He rewound it, played it again. Someone with system access killed that camera for exactly the time they needed and brought it back online before the monitoring software flagged an outage. That requires an admin credential, Victoria said quietly, or someone who gave an admin credential to someone else. He looked up at her. Who manages your security camera system? In-house. We have a 3-person IT security team. She stopped. One of them is, she stopped again. Someone you trust. I thought so. She straightened up. Her voice was carefully neutral. His name is Derek Fossey. He's been with us 4 years. He was hired the same quarter Richard Caulfield joined the board. Nathan looked back at the monitor. The 8 seconds of gray static. Such a small thing. The kind of thing that looked like nothing unless you knew what to look for. I need you to do something that's going to feel wrong, he said. Tell me. Don't confront Fossey. Don't change his access. Don't do anything different. He turned to face her. The only way to understand what we're dealing with is to let them keep moving and watch where they go. Victoria looked like she wanted to argue with this. He could see it, the impulse of a person who ran things to do something, to act, to fix. It was a sensible impulse. It was also exactly wrong. If they think we're onto them, he said, they shut down and regroup. Then we get nothing. And while they're still moving, they might try again, she said. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. You're asking me to use myself as bait. I'm asking you to keep doing your job while I figure out the full shape of this. He held her eyes, which means you can't go anywhere alone, not until we understand what we're dealing with. She nodded, once. It was not a comfortable nod. It was the nod of someone making a calculation and accepting a result they don't like. One more condition, Nathan said. You keep adding conditions. That's because I keep finding new reasons to have them. He stood up. I need to bring my daughter somewhere safe, somewhere I've chosen, not somewhere connected to you or your company. Of course. I mean it. Nobody on your team knows where she is. Nobody on your security staff. Not even your assistant. He looked at her steadily. The gray sedan this morning tells me they're already thinking about leverage. I'm not giving it to them. Victoria met his eyes, and something in her expression shifted. Something careful and serious. The expression of someone who understood exactly what was being said. I understand, she said. I won't involve her. Ever. He believed her. He wasn't entirely sure why. He'd stopped trusting people on instinct years ago, had learned to make trust a deliberate and provisional thing, extended with conditions and revocable. But he believed her now, in this small office, with the monitor still showing 8 seconds of gray static, and he filed that belief away and noted it, and didn't examine it further. He had calls to make. He had Lily to think about. He had a problem that was much larger than a stolen prototype and a dead researcher, a problem that had roots in something old and buried and connected to a man named Daniel Langford who had left a world that apparently had not finished with his daughter. Nathan Mercer had spent 11 months being invisible. He was done with that now, too. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby and he walked out into the Culver City afternoon, where the light was changing from gold to something more uncertain, and the city moved around him the way cities do, oblivious and relentless and indifferent to everything that was about to happen inside it. He made 3 calls before he reached his car. The first was to a man named Garrett Cole, formerly of the same unit, now running a private security consulting operation out of San Diego that he described as aggressively boring whenever anyone asked. Nathan and Garrett had the kind of friendship that doesn't require maintenance. They could go 8 months without talking and pick up exactly where they left off, which was usually somewhere uncomfortable. Garrett answered on the second ring, heard 30 seconds of what Nathan had to say, and responded with, "So you want me to watch an 8-year-old and a retired school teacher with a cat named after a Greek astronomer and not ask any questions about why?" "That's about right," Nathan said. "You're going to owe me an extremely good explanation eventually." "I know." "How long?" "I don't know yet." There was a pause. "She's safe where she is tonight?" "Tonight, yes. Tomorrow I need her moved." "Send me the address. I'll have somebody there by 6 a.m. Another pause. "You okay?" "I'm fine." "You always say that." "Because it's always approximately true," Nathan said, and Garrett made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and hung up. The second call was to Mrs. Okafor, who listened to Nathan explain that he needed Lily to stay with her for a few days, possibly longer, and that a man named Garrett might come by, and that this was a work situation that had gotten complicated. Mrs. Okafor was quiet for a moment and then said, "Is Lily in danger?" in the direct way of someone who has no patience for circumlocution. "Not if I do my job," Nathan said. "That's not a no." "No," he said. "It's not." Another silence. Then, "I'll make up the couch in the second bedroom. Ptolemy will be annoyed, but he'll survive." She paused. "Nathan, come back." He didn't know what to say to that, so he said, "Thank you," and ended the call. The third call he didn't make. He'd started to dial and then stopped, because the person he'd been about to call was someone he hadn't spoken to in 14 months, a contact inside Defense Intelligence who'd helped him disappear into civilian life, and calling that number now felt like opening a door he wasn't sure he could close again. He put the phone in his pocket and got in the car and sat for a moment in the parking structure. A different one from last night, bright and attended, nothing wrong with the geometry of it, and thought about 8 seconds of gray static on a security monitor. He drove to Lily's school. She came out the front entrance with her backpack on both shoulders, which she always did because she'd read somewhere that carrying it on one shoulder was bad for your spine, and she was the kind of kid who read something once and took it seriously forever. She saw him, and her face did the thing it always did. A quick brightening, like a light turned up. And then she saw his expression, and the brightness got careful. "You're early," she said. "I am." He took her backpack and slung it over his own shoulder. "How was school?" "We're doing fractions. I don't understand why you need to know the lowest common denominator when you can just multiply everything and it still works." "Because the answer gets ugly." "But it's still right. Sometimes right and clean are both requirements," Nathan said. She walked beside him, considering this with the thoroughness she applied to most things. "Is something wrong?" He looked down at her. She was 8 years old, and she had her mother's eyes, and she asked questions with her whole attention focused on the answer, which was also something she got from Sarah. He thought about lying. Not a real lie, just the parental softening of truth that he'd never been very good at, and that Lily had always seen through anyway. "I've got a work situation," he said. "You're going to stay with Mrs. Okafor for a few days, maybe a week." "The restaurant?" "Different work." He kept his voice even. "Remember I told you I used to do something else before?" She was quiet for a half a block. "The military stuff." "Yeah." "Okay," she said. Not a dramatic okay. Not a scared one. Just okay. She processed things quietly, his daughter. Sometimes that worried him more than if she'd made a fuss. "Can I bring my map notebook?" "You can bring whatever fits in your school bag. Ptolemy scratches people sometimes. Tell him your dad says to behave." That got a small smile out of her. She reached up and took his hand, which she didn't always do anymore. She was at the age where she was figuring out what was babyish and what wasn't, and the calculation shifted day by day. He held her hand and they walked the rest of the way to the apartment, and he helped her pack her bag, and they went to Mrs. Okafor's and he stayed for dinner. Mrs. Okafor made jollof rice that Lily ate 3 portions of. Ptolemy sat on the windowsill and regarded Nathan with the contempt of a cat who has witnessed too many human complications and found them tedious. After dinner, Lily fell asleep on the couch with her map notebook open on her chest, her hand still loosely holding the pencil, a half-drawn river trailing off the edge of the page. Nathan sat across the room and looked at her for a while. Mrs. Okafor came in from the kitchen with 2 cups of tea and set one near him without asking and sat in the armchair by the window. She was a small woman in her 60s with reading glasses perpetually pushed up on her forehead and the unhurried manner of someone who had learned that most things work themselves out and some things don't, and you can rarely tell in advance which is which. "She's good," Mrs. Okafor said, nodding toward Lily. "I know. She talks about her mother sometimes, when she thinks I won't make it a big moment." Nathan held his tea. "What does she say?" "That she had a good laugh. That she smelled like the coconut lotion from the pharmacy." Mrs. Okafor looked at him steadily. "She says her father gets sad when she talks about it, so she mostly doesn't." He didn't say anything. There wasn't much to say to that. "She's not protecting you from grief, Nathan. She's protecting you from feeling like you failed her by grieving." Mrs. Okafor picked up her tea. "There's a difference. You should talk to her about her mother, even when it's hard." He looked at Lily on the couch, the half-drawn river on the page. "I know," he said. He left at 10 and drove back to the apartment on Hayworth Avenue and checked the street before he got out of the car. No gray sedan. A different car, dark blue, parked 3 buildings down, that he didn't recognize. He noted the plates, sat for 4 minutes, watched the car. Nobody moved. Could be a neighbor's guest. Could be nothing. He went upstairs and sat in the dark apartment and thought about what Victoria had told him about her father. Daniel Langford, Defense Intelligence. Retired when Victoria was 10. Died at 62 of a cardiac event. Same cause of death as Marcus Hale. The kind of coincidence that isn't one. Nathan opened his laptop and started searching. Not official databases, he didn't have access to those anymore and wasn't going to risk the footprint of trying. Public records, business filings, news archives. Daniel Langford appeared in trade publications as a clean energy investor in the mid-2000s, after leaving government. Before that, nothing searchable, which was itself a data point. Men who leave defense intelligence cleanly don't disappear from the public record entirely unless they were in something that required them to. He found a mention in a 2003 conference program. A Daniel J. Langford listed as an attendee at a defense technology summit in Colorado Springs. Panel topic: Emerging Energy Applications in Defense Infrastructure. He looked at that for a long time. Then he closed the laptop and went to bed, and this time he actually slept, 4 hours of it, which was about what his body had learned to run on. By 7 the next morning, he was back in Culver City. Victoria was already in the building. She was in the auxiliary office he'd used the day before, standing at the monitor with a coffee cup and an expression that suggested she'd been there for a while. When Nathan came in, she turned and he could see immediately that something had changed. "Bertrand Chu died last night," she said. Nathan stopped. "Who is he?" He was our chief materials engineer, the Helix 7 project." She set the coffee cup down with a small, hard sound. "They're saying he drove his car into a drainage canal on the way home from the office. Single vehicle accident. He was seen leaving the building at 8:15. She stopped. "He's been with the company for 7 years. He had a son in college." Nathan came the rest of the way into the room. "Where's the drainage canal?" "Culver City, half a mile from here." She looked at him. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't quite. She'd noticed and was holding the coffee cup to manage it. "2 members of my research team dead in 4 days, Nathan. 2 people who knew Helix 7 in detail." "They're not stealing the technology," he said. "Or they're not only stealing it, they're also eliminating the people who could explain how it works well enough to testify against them." The word testify hung in the air between them. "Which means they have a timeline," Nathan said. "They need the prototype understood and documented before any investigation can build enough to subpoena records." He moved to the monitor. "And it means we're running out of time to watch and wait." "I thought you said we needed to let them keep moving." "I did. That was before they killed a second person." He turned to face her. "Who else on your team has deep technical knowledge of Helix 7, beyond what the official org chart shows?" Victoria thought for a moment. "There's a woman named Dr. Priya Sandhu. She's officially listed as a material science consultant. She comes in twice a week, but she wrote the foundational electrochemical equations that the whole system is based on. Without her original work, the prototype is mostly useless to someone trying to reverse engineer it. Does she know that?" "She knows her work is important. She doesn't know people are dying." Victoria looked at him. "She has no idea any of this is happening." "We need to move her," Nathan said. "Today. Right now, before this office day starts, and before whoever is doing this figures out she's the next logical target." He was already reaching for his phone. "Can you get her on the phone without going through your main office system?" "I have her personal number. Use it. Tell her there's an emergency with a project detail. You need her to meet you somewhere that is not this building. Don't tell her why on the phone." Victoria was already dialing. Nathan moved to the window. Ground floor on this side, a parking lot, and beyond it a street. And on that street a black car he didn't like the look of. It was parked in a loading zone with the engine running, which in Los Angeles meant either someone was waiting for someone or someone was watching someone. He watched it for 30 seconds. The engine stayed on. Victoria was talking on the phone, her voice calm and specific in the way of someone accustomed to giving directions that don't invite discussion. Nathan heard her say, "Yes, now, I know it's early. And the coffee shop on Washington, the one near the park, you've been there." Then she hung up. "She'll be there in 40 minutes, Victoria said. "Good." He looked at her. "You drive yourself here this morning?" "Yes, underground parking." "We'll take my car, different route." She looked at him steadily. "You saw something." "Maybe. Probably nothing." He moved toward the door. "Probably nothing is what gets people killed." They went through the building's service entrance and out through the basement parking to his car, which was an unremarkable gray Civic that he'd bought for cash, and that had nothing remarkable about it whatsoever, which was its primary virtue. Victoria got in the passenger seat without commenting on the car, and Nathan drove them out through the alley rather than the main entrance. The black car with the running engine was still in the loading zone when they came around the block. Nathan noted it and kept going and said nothing. Dr. Priya Sandhu was already at the coffee shop when they arrived, sitting at a corner table with an untouched espresso and the expression of a woman who had rearranged her morning based on a phone call and was reserving judgment on whether that had been reasonable. She was small, 50s, with reading glasses on and the kind of watchful attention that Nathan associated with people who spent their professional lives noticing things that were too small for others to see. She looked at Nathan when Victoria introduced him and said, "You're not a material scientist." "No," Nathan said. "What are you?" "Careful," he said. She looked at Victoria. "What is actually happening?" Victoria told her. "Not everything. Not the defense intelligence thread, not Nathan's background, but the theft, Marcus Hale, Bertrand Chu." She kept her voice low, and she didn't soften any of it. Nathan watched Priya's face as she listened. The woman didn't fall apart. Her jaw tightened and her hands went flat on the table, and she looked at the espresso she hadn't touched. "Bertrand," she said when Victoria finished. "I'm sorry," Victoria said. "I know you were close." He had a standing lunch with his son every other Sunday. Priya looked up. "Who knows I'm connected to the project at a foundational level? Inside the company, your work is credited in the internal technical documentation, but your specific contribution is buried in footnotes. Anyone doing a surface review of the org chart would see you as a consultant." Victoria looked at her. "But a detailed review of the technical files would find me." Priya picked up the espresso finally and drank half of it. "So you want to move me somewhere?" "Until we figure out who's behind this and hand it to law enforcement," Victoria said. "Yes." Priya was quiet for a moment. "My husband is in Sacramento this week. He's a surgeon. He's got a conference." "Does he need to know?" "He needs to know I'm not home, yes." She said it with the dry clarity of a woman who had been married a long time. "I'm not going to disappear on him." "We can arrange a cover story," Nathan said. "I don't want a cover story. I'll tell him there's a security situation at the company and I'm staying with a colleague." She set down the cup. "He'll grumble and he'll accept it. He's practical." A pause. "Where am I staying?" Nathan thought for a moment. "Do you have family in the area? Somewhere not connected to your professional life?" "My sister in Pasadena. She's a nurse, she's nosy, she'll ask questions." "That's fine. Nosy neighbors are good for security." He pulled out a card, one of the plain ones he kept for purposes like this, just a phone number on it, and slid it across the table. "If anything feels wrong, anyone you don't recognize near the house, any car that shows up more than once, call that number first." Priya looked at the card and pocketed it with the efficiency of someone who has decided to commit to a course of action. "Dr. Hale," she said. "Did he suffer?" Victoria looked at the table. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've known Marcus since graduate school," Priya said. "He used to argue that pure science was apolitical, that the work existed outside of who used it." She pushed her reading glasses up. "He was very wrong about that, but he was a good man." She stood up. "Tell me what you need from me before I leave." Nathan spent the next 20 minutes asking her specific questions about the Helix 7 documentation, what existed, where it was stored, what a sophisticated actor would need in order to actually use the prototype without the accompanying knowledge base. Priya answered with precision, occasionally stopping to think and then resuming without preamble. By the end of it, Nathan had a clearer picture of why Marcus Hale and Bertrand Chu were dead and why they hadn't gone after Priya yet. They hadn't found her contribution buried in the footnotes. They would. It was a matter of time. After Priya left, to go home, pack a bag, and drive to her sister's house in Pasadena, Nathan sat across from Victoria in the corner table and looked at his coffee, which he'd ordered but not touched. "The Vienna consulting firm," he said, "the one that's been making buyout offers through Caulfield. Can you get me their full corporate documentation, whatever your legal team has collected?" "By this afternoon. And I need something else." He looked at her. I need to know who attended a defense technology conference in Colorado Springs in 2003. Specifically, anyone who was also connected to energy infrastructure research. Victoria looked at him for a moment. My father? He was on a panel about energy applications and defense infrastructure. I found the conference program. He paused. I think the organization behind this has a connection to whatever project he was involved in before he left government. And I think that connection is why your company was targeted specifically, not just for the technology, but because someone is finishing something. Finishing something. She repeated it quietly. Your father built safeguards into the technology that make it impossible to acquire through normal channels. That's not just good business practice. That's someone who knew specific people might come for it and was making it as hard as possible for them. He watched her face. Did he ever talk to you about why he left the government? He said he wanted to build something instead of taking things apart. She said it with the automatic quality of a sentence repeated from memory. I was 10. I thought it was a perfectly sensible reason. And now? She looked at the empty espresso cup Priya had left behind. Now, I think he was running from something and trying to put something right at the same time. She met Nathan's eyes. He gave me the company knowing they would eventually come, didn't he? It wasn't quite a question. Nathan didn't treat it like one. The safeguards, the buried IP protections, training you on the technical details personally so the knowledge lived in you and not just in documents. He stopped. Yeah, I think he knew. Victoria was quiet for a moment that stretched. Then she picked up her phone and made a call, and Nathan listened to her speak to her legal department in the clipped and specific language of someone who has run an organization long enough that requests don't require explanation. And he drank his cold coffee and thought about a man named Daniel Langford, who had spent the last years of his life building walls and had apparently not built them quite high enough. The corporate documentation arrived that afternoon. A thick digital file that Victoria's general counsel sent over with a note that said the Vienna firm, called Meridian Advisory Group, had been formally inactive since 2021, but that its principals had since appeared in connection with 3 other entities, all of them registered in jurisdictions known for financial opacity. Nathan went through the files in the auxiliary office with his jacket off and the door closed, building a map on a yellow legal pad that he'd found in a desk drawer. 3 of Meridian's principals had government backgrounds, 2 European, 1 American. The American was listed only as a consultant, no full name identified in one document by the initials RWH. Nathan stared at those initials for a long time. There was a man he'd known, not personally, not closely, a name that moved through certain corridors with a particular weight attached to it, with those initials. A man who had worked in special activities through the late 90s and early 2000s, and then moved into the private sector with the kind of transition that left no footprint. He wasn't certain. He needed more. He went to find Victoria. She was in her office, the real one, 2 floors up, glass and concrete, and an actual view, working through something on her own laptop with the focused energy that he'd noticed was her default state, like she was always working against a deadline that only she could see. She looked up when he came in and immediately read something in his face. You found something, she said. A thread. He sat across from her desk. It might be nothing. I need to pull it before I can tell you what it means. How? I need to make a call I've been avoiding. He looked at her. The person I need to call is someone connected to the world your father left. Connected to the world I left. He paused. Once I make that call, certain people will know I'm looking at this. There's no way to do it quietly. Victoria held his gaze. Is it necessary? If I'm right about the initials, then yes. Because if I'm right, we're not dealing with a corporate espionage operation. He kept his voice even, factual, because the facts were alarming enough without embellishment. We're dealing with a faction of people who have been operating across multiple governments for at least 20 years, who have the resources to stage deaths as accidents and kidnap corporate executives and buy their way into boardrooms. He paused. And who have been waiting specifically for your technology to become real so they can use it for something your father spent the last decade of his life trying to prevent. Victoria didn't flinch. He'd noticed that about her. She didn't flinch at information, even bad information. She sat with it and processed it. and then decided what to do. It was a good quality. It was also slightly unnerving. "Make the call," she said. He went back to the auxiliary office and closed the door and dialed the number he'd started to dial the night before and stopped. It rang 4 times. Then a voice, cautious, slightly rough. "This number doesn't exist anymore." "I know," Nathan said. "I need 30 minutes. A pause. "It's been 14 months. "I know that too." Another pause, longer. "Give me an hour. I'll call you back on a clean line." The line went dead. Nathan sat in the small windowless office and waited. He thought about Derek Fossey and the 8 seconds of gray static. He thought about Richard Caulfield pushing for a settlement for 2 years through a conduit that traced back to a firm with no real principles. He thought about Bertrand Chu driving into a drainage canal on a road he drove every night. The callback came in 42 minutes. "Talk," the voice said. Nathan talked. He kept it concise. Operational habit, say what's needed, and nothing more. The conference program. The Meridian Principles. The initials RWH. The specific methodology of the men in the parking garage. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that Nathan checked to see if the call had dropped. "You need to stop," the voice said finally. Not threatening, almost tired. "Tell me about RWH." "Nathan, tell me." Another long silence. "His name is Roland Hatch. He ran a program in the early 2000s called Prometheus Gate. The program was about weaponizing energy infrastructure, specifically developing technology that could be used to create localized power disruption events that would be attributed to equipment failure." A breath. "It was shut down in 2007, officially. Daniel Langford was one of the people who reported it. He testified in a closed session, and the program was classified and buried." Nathan felt something settle into place in his understanding of things, the way a joint clicks back into position, uncomfortable and clarifying. And Hatch. Hatch lost everything when the program was buried. His career, his clearances, his DoD contracts. He spent the next decade building a private network. Money from private equity, contacts in European defense circles, former assets who owed him. The voice paused. "He's been waiting for energy storage technology to reach a viable threshold, because the application he was working on in Prometheus Gate, it required a power source that didn't exist yet. And now it does," Nathan said. "Langford Energy's Helix 7 is apparently the first system that meets the technical requirements." The voice paused again. "Nathan, this is not a corporate investigation. If Hatch is moving, he has resources and reach that—" "I understand what he has," Nathan said. "You have a daughter." "I know." "I'm serious. Walk away from this. Take the woman to the FBI and walk away." The FBI has been fed bad intelligence for 2 months. By the time they untangle it, Hatch has the prototype working, and Marcus Hale and Bertrand Chu are just accidents, and nothing ever comes of any of it. He stood up. "I need everything you have on Hatch, and I need it without this conversation going anywhere." A very long silence. Then, "I'll send it to the secondary address. Give me 6 hours." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I don't want to be thanked for this." The voice, almost as an afterthought. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Nathan said. "You always—" "Say that. I know." He ended the call. He sat for a moment in the quiet of the small room and thought about a program called Prometheus Gate and a man who'd spent 15 years rebuilding what he'd lost and had now apparently gotten close enough to reach for it. He thought about Daniel Langford sitting in a closed session, testifying, and then going home and starting a company and training his daughter to hold the knowledge of what he'd built in her own head, because paper could be stolen and servers could be breached, but you couldn't take what lived in a person's memory without taking the person. Until you could. Until you had the resources to do exactly that, and the patience to wait for the right moment. Nathan went to find Victoria, and he told her everything. He sat across from her in her glass office with the city spread out below them, and he told her about Prometheus Gate and Roland Hatch and what her father had done and why, and he watched her face move through something complicated and difficult that she managed with a composure that cost her visibly. Her hands were flat on the desk. Her jaw was set. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "He never told me," she said. "He was protecting you. He was keeping secrets." She said it without bitterness, which somehow made it land harder. "I spent 6 years building his company without knowing why it mattered. Not the real reason." She looked at Nathan. "He should have told me." "Yes," Nathan said. "He should have." She looked out the window. The afternoon light was shifting, Los Angeles doing its late-day thing where the smog and the sunlight conspired to make everything look more golden than it was. "What do we do now?" "We need to find where Hatch is operating from. The prototype gives us about 2 weeks before they can have it documented well enough to be useful. That's a guess, but it's based on how long it took your own team to get it to this stage from a working model." He looked at her. "Caulfield, the board member. He's the access point. He's been Hatch's man inside the company for 4 years. I want to confront him. Not yet." "Nathan, I know." He held her eyes. "I know. But Caulfield is the thread that leads to Hatch, and Hatch is who we actually need. If we pull Caulfield now, Hatch goes dark, and the prototype disappears, and we have nothing but a board member and a dead end." He paused. 2 days. Give me 2 days to find where Hatch is and where the prototype is. Then we take everything to someone who can actually act on it." She held his gaze. He'd noticed that she did this. She looked at you when she was deciding something, not away from you. It was a little disconcerting, and also, he had to admit, a quality he respected. 2 days, she said. He nodded. He went back downstairs and picked up his legal pad and looked at the map he'd built, the lines connecting names and entities and dates, and he thought about Roland Hatch and what a man did with 15 years of patient fury and the specific skills of someone who had spent a career making things disappear. His phone buzzed, a text from a number he didn't recognize, which he checked against the secondary address his contact had mentioned. File incoming, 6 hours. Then this number goes dark. He put the phone down and picked up the legal pad and kept working. 2 floors up, he could hear distantly the movement of the office continuing its day. Phones, footsteps, the particular ambient sound of people working toward something they believed in, most of them not knowing that the thing they'd built was now at the center of a fight that had been waiting for them for 15 years. In the parking lot below the building, the black car with the running engine had moved. It was parked now on the street to the east, half a block away, at an angle that gave a clear sight line to both exits. Nathan had already clocked it. He'd clocked it the moment it moved. He pulled the blinds and kept working. The file arrived at 11:47 p.m. Nathan was still in the auxiliary office, the building mostly empty by then, a few lights on in the upper floors where Victoria was still working. He'd checked twice on his way to the coffee machine in the break room, an old habit of knowing where the people around him were at any given moment. The file came through the secondary address as promised, a compressed archive that unpacked into 4 folders: personnel, financial, operational history, and a 4th folder simply labeled PG Prometheus Gate. He opened the operational history first, 47 pages of summary documents, the kind of bureaucratic language that flattens terrible things into passive voice and euphemism. He'd read documents like these before and had learned to translate them. Asset neutralization meant killing. Infrastructure disruption events meant blackouts engineered to look like equipment failure. Population pressure scenarios meant deliberately cutting power to civilian areas during extreme weather to create conditions that would justify a policy outcome. He sat back in the chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. The program had run for 6 years, from 2001 to 2007. It had been tested 3 times in limited deployment, once in a Central American country during a disputed election, once in a region of Eastern Europe with contested pipeline rights, once domestically in a simulation that the summary document described as a tabletop exercise, but that had 3 footnotes referencing real locations and real equipment. Daniel Langford had been one of 12 people who had access to the full operational picture. He was one of 2 who had gone to the oversight committee. The other one had died in a car accident in 2005, 2 years before the program was officially shut down. Nathan thought about that for a moment. Then he kept reading. The personnel folder had Roland Hatch's full file. The photo was 15 years old. A man in his late 50s, heavy set through the shoulders, with the flat expression of someone who had learned to keep his face neutral in photographs taken by people he didn't trust. He'd spent 30 years in special activities, most of it in energy and infrastructure-related operations, which was a specialty so narrow it had essentially made him the only real expert in a field he'd largely invented. When Prometheus Gate was shut down, and his career with it, he'd appealed through 3 different channels, lost each time, and then gone quiet. Too quiet, as it turned out. The financial folder showed the network he'd built in the years since. Private equity connections in London and Zurich, former assets, people who'd worked with him in various capacities and who owed him various things, distributed across 8 countries. A property in the Swiss Alps that appeared in 4 separate corporate registries under 3 different names. And a facility, identified in one document only by a satellite coordinate and the notation primary staging, that was located in the Sierra Nevada mountains, approximately 4 hours north of Los Angeles. Nathan wrote the coordinates on his legal pad. He opened the PG folder last. It was smaller than the others, 11 documents, most of them heavily redacted summaries of what the program had originally intended to accomplish. But the last document was different. It was a technical specification, dated 2003, written in the language of someone who understood both engineering and strategy. It described a device. The document called it an energy cascade initiator that would use a high-density power source to trigger controlled failures in electrical grid infrastructure. Targeted, scalable, attributable to natural causes or equipment degradation. The technical specification had a footnote at the bottom, a note about power source requirements. It said that existing battery technology was insufficient for field deployment and that the program's timeline depended on advances in energy storage that were not yet available. And then, in brackets, a handwritten addition that someone had scanned into the document. Langford Project. Monitor. As in, wait. As in, keep watching Daniel Langford's work and wait for it to become useful. Nathan put the legal pad down flat on the desk. He looked at the ceiling again. He thought about 15 years of patient, systematic waiting, watching a company grow, placing a man on the board, positioning assets, building the kidnapping operation as a contingency for when the direct approach failed. This was not improvisation. This was a plan that had been running in the background of everything else for a decade and a half. He picked up his phone and called Victoria. She answered on the first ring. "You're still here?" "Come down to the auxiliary office," he said. She came in 4 minutes later wearing a different version of the same outfit she'd had on that morning. He was starting to understand that she didn't vary much in her professional presentation, dark and simple, nothing distracting, a deliberate choice. She looked at his face and looked at the legal pad and sat down. He told her everything in the file, the program, the device, the footnote. He read her the bracketed handwriting, Langford Project, Monitor, and he watched what that did to her face. She didn't fall apart, but something shifted behind her eyes, some final version of the story she'd been telling herself about her father's choices. "They had him under surveillance for 15 years, she said. "At minimum. Possibly from the moment he left the program." She was quiet. Then, "The Helix 7 specification, the one we filed for international patent protection last year. That was the moment they decided to move. Filing put the technical specs into a format they could access and begin evaluating," Nathan said. "Before that, they were monitoring. After that, they started moving pieces into position." She looked at the coordinates he'd written on the legal pad. "Is that where the prototype is?" "Probably. It's isolated, it's defensible, and it's 4 hours from here. Close enough to move quickly, far enough to have warning if someone comes." He looked at her. "I need to go up there." Victoria shook her head. Not a refusal. A response to something she was thinking through. "You can't go alone, and we can't tip them by going in with a large team." She looked at him. "But we also can't just hand coordinates to law enforcement and hope they move fast enough. They've already demonstrated they can feed disinformation into federal investigations." "I know. So what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we need to give law enforcement something they can't ignore and can't be redirected away from. Something public enough that burying it becomes impossible." He paused. "And I'm thinking we need to deal with Caulfield tonight, before he reports to Hatch that the investigation is getting too close." "Tonight," Victoria repeated. He doesn't know what we know. But he'll know something is wrong when his surveillance team reports that you've been meeting with me for 2 days and moving people around. He's going to make contact with Hatch soon, if he hasn't already. Nathan looked at her steadily. We need to be talking to Caulfield before Hatch knows we found the facility. Confront him. Record the conversation. Everything. His connection to Meridian, to Hatch, how long he's been feeding information from the board. He held her gaze. You've worked with this man for 4 years. You know how he thinks. I need you to walk into that conversation and make him believe that you have more than you have, and that the only way this ends without prison time is if he cooperates. Victoria was quiet for a moment. That's a bluff? Partially. We have enough to connect him to Meridian. We have enough to establish that his presence on the board coincided with the surveillance operation. He shrugged slightly. Whether a prosecutor can make it stick depends on what he says in the next few hours. She stood up. Where's he now? Nathan had been tracking Caulfield's known address and office location since that afternoon. Basic external observation. No access to any systems he shouldn't be touching. His building, probably. He lives in Brentwood. He tends to work late. He's vain about it, Victoria said, with the particular flatness of someone describing a quality they've grown tired of tolerating. He thinks it signals dedication. It signals that he doesn't have anyone to go home to, but he doesn't know that. She picked up her phone and dialed. The call connected on the third ring. Nathan heard a man's voice, measured and slightly surprised. Richard, Victoria said, I need to see you tonight. It's about the Helix 7 situation. She paused. I know it's late. I've been going through the board documentation from the past 3 years, and I found something that I think you need to know about before the morning. She paused again. Yes, an hour. My office. She hung up and looked at Nathan. He'll come, she said. He'll come because he needs to know what I think I found. He'll also come prepared. Meaning he'll want to record the conversation too, and he may have a contingency if he thinks you're too close. Nathan looked at her. Do you have a security person you trust? Not the full team. One person, personally vetted by you. She thought for a moment. A woman named June. She handles my personal protection when I travel. She's former Secret Service, she's been with me for 2 years personally, and she has no connection to the company's internal security apparatus. Get her in the building before Caulfield arrives. Service entrance, nothing obvious. He stood up. And then you're going to do exactly what you said. Walk into that conversation and make him tell you what he knows. And you? I'll be nearby, Nathan said. Richard Caulfield arrived at 10:20 p.m., which was almost exactly an hour after Victoria's call. Nathan watched him come through the lobby on the monitor feed in the security office. A man in his early 60s, the particular build of someone who had stayed athletic well past the point where it required effort, silver-haired and deliberate in his movements. He was carrying a leather folio, and he'd changed clothes since whatever he'd been doing earlier, fresh shirt, which told Nathan he'd gone home first, which meant he lived within 30 minutes of the office, which matched Brentwood. He also arrived alone, which was either confident or a good sign. Victoria met him in the conference room on the 14th floor. Nathan had positioned himself in an adjacent room connected by a door that didn't lock, with a clear line to the hallway and the conference room door, and he listened through a receiver that June had placed under the conference table 40 minutes earlier. June herself was in a utility room at the end of the hall, quiet and professional, and apparently very good at being somewhere without being noticed. I appreciate you coming in, Victoria said. Her voice through the receiver was clear. Of course. Caulfield's voice was warm in the way of a man who had spent a career in rooms like this one and knew exactly how to calibrate warmth. You said you found something in the board documentation? I did. Nathan heard her move, chair pulling back, the sound of a folder. I've been going through the acquisition inquiry correspondence from the past 2 years, specifically the communications that came through Meridian Advisory Group. A very brief pause, almost too brief to catch. I'm familiar with Meridian. They've been a go-between for several interested parties. They've been a go-between for one specific party, Victoria said, and I've spent the last 48 hours tracing that party back through 3 holding companies to a principal named Roland Hatch. She paused. I think you know that name, Richard. Silence. Nathan counted the seconds. 5. 6. I know the name, Caulfield said, Dubois said, and his voice had changed. Not dramatically. The warmth was still there, but underneath it, something had adjusted. The way a face changes when the person behind it stops pretending for a moment. Each saw, "Where are you going with this, Victoria? I want to understand your relationship with him." "I don't have a relationship with him. I have a professional history with entities that he's associated with. That's different." "Is it?" Her voice was steady, completely steady. Nathan was aware of being impressed by this and filed it away. "Because Marcus Hale is dead, Richard, and Bertrand Chu is dead, and 3 men tried to kidnap me in a parking garage 4 days ago." She paused. "And you have been connected to every information channel that would have allowed someone to plan and execute all of those things." Another silence. Longer this time. "I want a lawyer," Caulfield said. "You're not under arrest. We're having a conversation." "Then I want this conversation to end." "Richard." Her voice shifted, not harder, but something else, more direct. "I have enough to go to a federal prosecutor tomorrow morning. I have the Meridian connection. I have the board communications. I have evidence linking your IT system access to a camera manipulation event the night Marcus's research was stolen." She paused. "I also have a contact inside the intelligence community who is currently documenting Roland Hatch's network and the Prometheus Gate history, and your name appears in that documentation." She let that land. "What I don't have is everything, and what Hatch doesn't know is how much I have." Nathan heard Caulfield's breathing through the receiver. The man was thinking hard. "If you go to a prosecutor with a partial file," Caulfield said carefully, "Hatch disappears. He's very good at disappearing. You'll have me, and you'll have nothing else." "I know that," Victoria said, "which is why I'm talking to you instead." Silence. "There's a facility," Caulfield said finally. His voice had gone flat, the warmth entirely gone now. "In the Sierra Nevada. He's had the prototype for 4 days. His technical team is working on documentation. They've got a physicist and 2 materials engineers who he's had on retainer for the past 3 years, waiting for exactly this." He stopped. "He's moving faster than you think. He's not waiting for a full reverse engineering. He just needs enough to demonstrate functionality to a buyer." "Who's the buyer?" "I don't know. I genuinely don't know. He's kept that compartmentalized." A pause. "I was supposed to manage the board and maintain access to the company's technical documentation. That's all I was. I wasn't supposed to know about Hatch's end of it." "But you knew," Victoria said. "About Hatch. About what he's building." "I knew what Prometheus Gate was. I knew the application." Caulfield's voice was tired in a way that Nathan recognized. The tiredness of someone who has known something was wrong for a long time and has been performing the effort of not knowing it. "Daniel told me once before he went to the oversight committee. He asked me to help him. I didn't." A pause. "I thought Hatch's program was necessary. I thought Daniel was being naive about what the technology could be used for in defense applications." "My father died of a cardiac event at 62, Victoria said. "Like Marcus Hale." A very long silence. "I didn't know about that," Caulfield said quietly. "I didn't know he was involved in that." "Do you believe that matters?" No answer. "I need the exact location of the facility," Victoria said. "And I need whatever you have on Hatch's timeline." Another pause. Then Caulfield began to talk, and Nathan listened, and he wrote down coordinates that matched the ones he'd already found, plus 2 additional details: a private access road off a Forest Service route and a window. 36 hours, maybe less, before Hatch's technical team had enough documentation to make the prototype transferable to a buyer. 36 hours. Nathan left the adjacent room and walked to the stairwell and went up 2 flights and stood by the window on the 16th floor, looking out at the city. He called Garrett. "How's Lily?" Nathan said when Garrett answered. "Asleep. She beat me at 2 games of cards before dinner, which I'm choosing to see as a good sign for her future and a humbling experience for me." A pause. "You have something." "I have a location and a timeline. 36 hours maximum." "That's tight." "Yes." He looked at the city. I need two things. I need someone who can go directly to a specific federal prosecutor, not through FBI channels directly, with a documentation package that includes everything we have on Hatch and Prometheus Gate and the Caulfield connection. Someone who can guarantee the file doesn't get intercepted. And the second thing? I need you to come up here. Nathan said it without inflection, just the fact of it. I'm not going into that facility alone. Garrett was quiet for a moment. Nathan, I know. We're not active anymore. I run a consulting firm. You bus tables. I'm aware. Going into a defended facility with two people is also what we have, Nathan said. So are you in or not? A long pause. Then, with the resigned quality of a man who has known since a phone call 2 days ago that this was coming. Yeah, I'm in. Another pause. What about the woman? Victoria. Nathan thought for a moment. She goes to the federal prosecutor. She delivers the documentation package in person with a lawyer present, and she doesn't go anywhere alone until this is over. She's going to argue with that. I know. Are you going to win? Nathan thought about Victoria in the conference room 2 floors below, talking a man into betraying the network he'd served for 15 years. Probably not entirely, he said. But I'm going to try. He went back downstairs. Caulfield was gone. Escorted out by June with a set of very clear instructions about what happened if he contacted Hatch before Nathan had reached the facility. Victoria was in the conference room alone, sitting at the head of the table with the folder closed in front of her and her hands flat on the table. The posture of someone who has just completed something difficult and is giving themselves exactly 30 seconds to feel it before moving forward. Nathan sat down. He gave us the timeline and the access route, she said. I heard. She looked at him. 36 hours. Yes. Garrett Cole, she said, your contact from the unit. Is he coming? He'll be here by morning. She nodded slowly. And you want me to go to a prosecutor while you go to the facility. I want you to deliver the documentation that makes everything we've done in the past 2 days into something that can actually hold up. Without the legal case, going to the facility means nothing. We need both. I could help at the facility, she said. You could, he agreed, and I need you more in a lawyer's office. He held her gaze. The legal case is the difference between stopping Hatch and stopping this specific operation. The documentation you deliver is the thing that makes sure he can't rebuild it from wherever he runs to. She looked at the table. He could see her working through it, not because she disagreed with the logic, but because she'd spent the past 4 days running toward the problem, and being told to do it from a specific direction felt wrong in the instinctive way of someone who'd built a company by being in the room where things happened. Priya, she said finally. What about her? The Helix 7 documentation, the foundational equations that Priya wrote. If Hatch's team has been working with the prototype for 4 days, they may have already found her contribution in the technical files. If they've identified her as a gap in what they have, Nathan was already reaching for his phone. I'll have Garrett check the situation in Pasadena before he drives up. He dialed, relayed the instruction, got a confirmation in under a minute. She'll have someone with her by midnight, he told Victoria. She exhaled. Not dramatically, just a breath that released something. Okay, she said. I'll go to the prosecutor. I know someone in the U.S. Attorney's office. We worked together on a regulatory issue 3 years ago. She's careful, and she's not connected to any of the federal channels that Hatch has been working. She looked at Nathan. But I need everything. Every document, the Prometheus Gate files, the Caulfield recording, the Meridian corporate chain, all of it in a format I can present. Give me 2 hours, Nathan said. They worked through the night. Nathan compiled the documentation package, and Victoria organized it with the systematic thoroughness of someone who had spent 10 years building arguments for boards and regulators. And by 4 in the morning, they had a complete file that told the story in the order a prosecutor would need to hear it. June sat in the hallway and drank coffee from a thermos and kept watch on the elevator, which nobody used. At 5:15, Garrett arrived. Nathan met him in the building's underground parking structure. Garrett Cole was 41, built economically, with the kind of face that didn't look like much until you made him angry, at which point people tended to reassess. He was wearing a jacket, that was slightly too large, which Nathan understood was covering equipment he'd brought from the consulting firm's storage. They looked at each other for a moment. "You look like a busboy," Garrett said. "I was a busboy." Past tense, noted. Garrett looked around the parking structure out of habit. "Talk me through the facility." Nathan had the satellite coordinate, Asquam, and the access road. And Caulfield's description. A converted industrial structure, originally a mining survey station, reinforced and expanded sometime in the past 4 years. One main structure, a secondary outbuilding, a generator setup that explained how a remote facility stayed operationally powered. Caulfield had estimated 12 to 15 people on site, mostly technical staff, with a security detail of 6 to 8. Garrett listened without interrupting. When Nathan finished, he said, "What's the approach?" "Forest Service route, then foot, 1.5 miles through mixed terrain." Nathan looked at his legal pad. "We go in at the secondary outbuilding first. The prototype and the technical team will be in the main structure, but the security systems will route through the outbuilding." "You got that from Caulfield?" "I got the layout from Caulfield. The systems routing is an inference based on the structure type and the satellite imagery." He looked at Garrett. "Could be wrong." "Could be wrong," Garrett agreed without apparent alarm. "What's our goal specifically?" "The prototype needs to be intact and recoverable by law enforcement. The technical documentation Hatch's team has produced needs to be preserved as evidence, and the people on site need to be alive and present when law enforcement arrives." He paused. "We are not in the business of being the law enforcement that arrives. We go in, we secure the prototype, we transmit location confirmation to a clean federal contact, and we hold the situation until someone with the actual authority to make arrests gets there." Garrett nodded. "And if the security detail decides they'd rather not be held?" Nathan looked at him. "Right," Garrett said. "That was a stupid question." They went upstairs. Victoria was at the conference table with June, the documentation package assembled in a sealed portfolio, and a phone call already arranged with the U.S. Attorney's contact for 7 a.m. She looked at Garrett with the direct assessment she gave most things. "You're the one who's been watching my daughter," she said. Garrett looked slightly thrown by the framing. "I had someone watching her, yes." "Thank you," Victoria said simply. Garrett glanced at Nathan. Nathan gave him nothing. "We'll leave at 6, Nathan said to Victoria. "By the time we reach the facility, you should be with the prosecutor. Don't leave her office until you hear from me on the clean number." Victoria stood up and gathered the portfolio. She was precise and efficient about it, which he'd come to understand was how she moved when she was not letting herself think about the alternative to precision. Then she stopped. "Nathan." He looked at her. "Lily," she said. "If something—" She stopped herself. "Just—" Another stop. "Come back." He thought about Mrs. Okafor saying the same thing 3 nights ago in a different apartment. He thought about the way it landed the same way twice. "That's the plan," he said. She nodded and didn't say anything else and went with June to the elevator. Nathan watched the elevator doors close and then turned to Garrett, who was looking at him with the expression of a man observing something he has opinions about and is choosing not to voice them. "Don't," Nathan said. "I wasn't going to say anything," Garrett said. "Good." They went over the approach route twice more, and then Nathan went to the break room and made coffee and drank it standing up, looking at the window where the Los Angeles pre-dawn was doing what pre-dawn does in that city. A gradual warming of the dark that comes from the ambient light of 10 million people who never fully go to sleep. He thought about the Prometheus Gate document and its handwritten footnote. Langford Project. Monitor. He thought about Hatch waiting 15 years with the specific patience of a man who believed history owed him something. He thought about his daughter beating Garrett at cards and deciding that was funny, that he'd want to hear the details of that later. He rinsed his cup and put it in the dish rack and went to get his jacket, and they drove north into the dark as the city began its long argument with the morning. The highway emptying and then widening as Los Angeles fell behind them, and the mountains began to show against the sky, first as absence and then as shape, and the road climbed into something quieter and colder, where the air changed and the trees crowded the shoulders, and the facility they were heading for sat somewhere up ahead in the dark, waiting in the way that things wait. when the people inside them don't yet know that everything is about to be decided. Garrett drove. Nathan watched the road and checked his phone. A text from June confirming Victoria had arrived safely at a secured location ahead of the 7 a.m. call. A text from the contact number confirming the clean federal line was active and ready to receive location confirmation. No texts from anyone else. He put the phone in his jacket pocket and looked at the mountains and thought about what came next in the specific, technical, non-abstract way of someone who has spent years making the abstract concrete. The road curved north. The trees got denser. The sky ahead of them was beginning, barely at the eastern edge, to consider the possibility of light. They left the car on a Forest Service pullout 2 miles from the access road, hidden behind a stand of Jeffrey pines that were wide enough to matter. The air at this elevation was different, thinner, colder, smelling of resin, and the particular cleanness of altitude that Nathan had always associated with either very good days or very bad ones. The sky was the dark gray of pre-dawn, not quite black anymore, and they moved through it in the way they'd been trained to move. Deliberate, quiet, no wasted motion. Garrett had brought 2 sets of tactical equipment from the consulting firm's storage, stripped down to essentials. No identifying markings, no agency affiliation. Nathan had looked at it in the parking structure and not said anything, because the alternative was going in with a restaurant busboy's apron and the 2 plates he didn't have anymore, and that particular trick had a limited range of application. They moved through mixed forest for 40 minutes. The terrain was uneven, loose shale in patches, dry creek beds, the kind of ground that made noise if you weren't thinking about every foot placement. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. They'd done enough of this together in enough places that the communication had long since migrated out of words. At the edge of the tree line, Nathan stopped. The facility was below them on a flat bench of mountain terrain that looked like it had been cleared by someone who'd known what they were doing. Not a dramatic clearing, just enough. The main structure was a converted industrial building, 2 stories, metal-clad, with the kind of roof modifications that said climate control had been added after the fact. The secondary outbuilding sat 60 meters to the east, smaller, with a generator unit humming at low idle beside it. 2 vehicles were visible, a dark SUV and a utility truck. The lights in the main structure were on, which at 5:40 in the morning meant either they'd been on all night or the people inside were already working. Nathan counted what he could see. 1 man at the main entrance sitting rather than standing, which was a bad security habit that indicated they weren't expecting company. 1 more visible through a ground floor window of the secondary outbuilding. He watched for 8 minutes and picked up 1 more. A man making a circuit of the perimeter on an irregular pattern, which was better practice. But the irregularity wasn't as irregular as the man probably thought. 7 minutes between passes on the east side, he said quietly. Garrett was watching the same perimeter. I've got 6 on the west. They're not synchronized. They're not worried about the west because the terrain's worse. It is worse, Garrett agreed, which is why we're going that way. They went wide, staying in the trees, moving along the contour of the slope to the west side of the facility. The terrain was worse. Nathan slipped once on loose shale and caught himself on a boulder, scraping his palm in a way that would be annoying later, already forgetting it. They came in from the southwest corner where the outbuilding's shadow fell longest and the generator's hum covered the noise of movement. The outbuilding's side door was locked with a standard commercial padlock, which was the kind of security decision that happened when someone was more concerned about the main building and less concerned about everything else. Garrett dealt with it in about 45 seconds with a tension wrench and a pick that he produced from somewhere on his person with the casual availability of a man who considered these standard equipment. Inside, server racks, a workstation running on a split monitor, cable runs going in 2 directions, 1 into the ground toward the main building, 1 up through the roof to an antenna cluster. The security system control board was on the east wall. Nathan went to it while Garrett moved to the workstation. The control board was more sophisticated than he'd expected. 6 camera feeds covering the facility exterior, motion sensors on the main structure perimeter, and a panel of switches that controlled gate functions and external lighting. He located the camera recording circuit, a separate unit running independently of the main system, which meant cutting the server power wouldn't kill the cameras. He found the manual override for the exterior lighting. Recording system, Garrett said from the workstation. It's writing to a local drive and uploading to a cloud backup in 60-second intervals. Can you freeze the upload without triggering an alert at the main building? Garrett looked at the workstation for a moment. If their monitoring is passive, yes. If someone's actively watching the dashboard, they'll see the upload pause. At 5:40 in the morning. Right. Garrett made 3 keystrokes. Done. Upload frozen. Local recording is still running. That was important. Local recording continued meant everything happening in the facility in the next hour would still be captured. Nathan filed that and turned back to the control board. I'm going to switch off the external perimeter sensors on the south side for 90 seconds, he said. Long enough to get to the main building's service entrance without triggering the motion alert. What's in the main building that we don't know about? Hatch's technical team, the prototype, and whatever security detail isn't outside. Nathan looked at the camera feeds. In one of them, feed 4, covering the main building interior, a wide angle of what appeared to be a large open workspace. He could see people. 4 people at workstations. Equipment he didn't have names for but recognized as specialized instrumentation. And in the center of the space, on a reinforced platform, a device about the size of a large suitcase. The Helix 7 prototype. He also saw, in the corner of Feed 4's frame, a man sitting with a chair tipped back against the wall, holding what appeared to be a coffee cup. Security, not technical. The posture was different. One inside security visible, Nathan said. Probably more. Caulfield said 6 to 8 total. He said 6 to 8. He may not have had current numbers. So minimum 6, unknown maximum, inside a building we haven't been in. Garrett looked at him. You know, this is what reasonable people would call a bad situation. Reasonable people aren't here. No, Garrett agreed. We are. He stood up. How do you want to do it? Nathan thought. The prototype was the priority, intact and secured. The documentation Hatch's team had produced was the second priority. After that, contain the situation, get the technical staff out of the way, hold until law enforcement arrived. He'd already transmitted the location confirmation to the clean federal line 20 minutes ago, in the trees before they'd entered the facility. Response time to this location, even with priority, was a minimum of 90 minutes. Probably more. We split at the service entrance, Nathan said. You take the west side of the main floor. The technical staff. Keep them together. Non-confrontational, if possible. I'll go for the prototype and deal with whoever's between me and it. Non-confrontational, Garrett repeated. They're not soldiers. They're engineers Hatch hired and retained. Most of them don't know the full picture. Nathan looked at the feed. They're not the problem. And the security detail is. They looked at each other. Clean federal contact has the location, Nathan said. Whatever happens in the next 90 minutes, the case exists whether we walk out or not. That's a very uncomfortable thing to say out loud. I know. Let's not make it relevant, Garrett said. They moved. The south perimeter sensor went offline for 90 seconds, and they crossed the open ground fast and low, and came to the service entrance on the main building's south wall. The door was metal, commercial grade, with a push-bar interior release and a keycard reader on the outside. Nathan had a card he'd taken from the outbuilding's workstation, a system access card that Garrett had identified as having general facility privileges. He ran it across the reader. It paused. He felt the 2 seconds like something physical. Then the light went green. Inside was a short corridor with bare concrete walls and 2 doors, one straight ahead, one to the right. Nathan could hear the low ambient sound of equipment running, HVAC, the subtle electrical hum of the instrumentation he'd seen on the camera feed. He pointed Garrett toward the right-hand door, which based on the building's layout should come out on the west side of the main floor. Garrett went. Nathan went straight ahead. The door at the end of the corridor opened onto the main workspace, and everything happened at once. The man with the coffee cup was not in the corner where Nathan had seen him on the camera feed. He was standing 3 feet from the door, talking to one of the technical staff. And when the door opened, he turned with the immediate alertness of someone who'd been sitting around all night getting tired and was suddenly not tired. He dropped the coffee. He reached. Nathan was already moving. Inside the reach before the man's hand connected with the weapon, redirect the arm, use the forward motion, and the man went hard into the workstation behind him, which made a significant amount of noise and toppled over and brought with it a monitor and a cascade of cable that seemed specifically designed to be as loud as possible at 5:45 in the morning. The 4 technical staff scattered. One of them shouted. From the west side of the space, Nathan heard Garrett's voice, calm and direct, and exactly loud enough. "Nobody moves. Hands where I can see them. I'm not here for you people. Stay still, and this is over in 2 minutes." Nathan had the security man's weapon and the security man's wrist, and the man was making the calculation that people make in that situation, whether the equation favored compliance or resistance. Nathan put a small amount of additional pressure on the wrist joint to clarify the equation. The man decided on compliance. "On the floor," Nathan said. "Face down. Don't make it complicated." The man went down. Nathan zip-tied his wrists with ties from his jacket pocket, another thing Garrett had considered standard equipment, and looked up at the room. Garrett had the 4 technical staff gathered on the west side, none of them moving. One of them, young, probably mid-20s, with the expression of someone who had just made a very significant career reassessment, raising both hands much higher than was necessary. 3 security down total, the one Nathan had just handled. 1 Garrett had intercepted on the west side before Nathan had come through the door, and the man who'd been outside at the main entrance, who Garrett had passed on the way in and dealt with a quiet efficiency that Nathan hadn't watched because he'd been focused on his own approach, which left 3 to 5 more, depending on whose count you believed. Nathan moved to the prototype. Up close it was smaller than it looked on the camera. The reinforced platform gave it scale. The device itself was a rectangular housing, dark gray composite material, with a series of connection ports along one face and a small status display showing a steady green readout. Around it on the platform's surface were the physical notes and printouts that Hatch's technical team had produced, hand-annotated diagrams, measurement logs, a thick sheaf of documentation that represented 4 days of reverse engineering work. He photographed all of it with his phone. 16 shots, fast and systematic. Then he pulled a small hard case from his jacket, something else Garrett had provided, and inserted the data drive that copied the workstation files that Garrett had loaded during the outbuilding phase. He plugged it into the prototype's primary port and let it run. "How long?" Garrett said from across the room. 3 minutes. "We may not have 3 minutes." Nathan looked at the corridor he'd come from. No movement. He looked at a second corridor on the north side of the room that he hadn't had a clear angle on from the camera feed. Still nothing. "We have 3 minutes," he said. He was wrong by about 45 seconds. They came from the north corridor set. 2 of them, moving fast, already committed to the geometry of the room, which told Nathan they'd been elsewhere in the building when the noise happened and had come down a back route. The first one through the door was big and experienced and had a better tactical read on the room than the coffee cup man had. He came in low and went immediately for cover behind the equipment rack on the north wall. The second one came in higher and went left, and Nathan was already moving because standing next to the prototype was the wrong place to be. What followed was ugly in the way that physical confrontations in enclosed spaces are always ugly. Not cinematic, not clean, nothing happening the way training diagrams suggest it happens. Nathan took a hit to his left side that he registered as impact and heat and set aside, because the alternative to setting it aside was stopping, and stopping was not available. He put the second man into the equipment rack, which gave more than it should have, spilling components across the floor in a way that made the footing worse, and came back around to find the first man had moved from cover to engage Garrett. Garrett was good. Nathan had known this for 15 years, had trusted it in places that made the Sierra Nevada facility look calm. But Garrett was 41 and had spent 2 years running a consulting firm. And the first man was younger and also good, and the result was a fight that was going on longer than it should have. Nathan covered the distance in 5 strides and ended it. Both men were down. Garrett was breathing harder than usual and had a split lip that was producing a quantity of blood disproportionate to its severity, which was how split lips always worked. And he looked at Nathan and said, "I'm fine," before Nathan said anything. "You're bleeding on the floor," Nathan said. "I'm aware." Garrett pressed the back of his hand against his lip. "How much time on the drive?" Nathan turned back to the prototype. The status light on the data drive was still running. 90 seconds. Then let's be quiet for 90 seconds. They were. The technical staff on the west side of the room had not moved. The young one with his hands up still had them up. Someone, one of the older ones, a woman in her 50s with the specific, exhausted expression of a person who had known for several days that she was in something wrong, said quietly to no one in particular, "I want to cooperate with whatever process comes next." "That's a good decision," Garrett told her. The drive finished. Nathan pulled it and pocketed it and looked at the room, at the 5 security personnel accounted for, at the technical staff grouped on the west side, at the documentation on the platform, at the prototype with its steady green status display. One more, he thought. Caulfield had said 6 to 8. He had 5. There was one person unaccounted for who was not in this room and had not come down the north corridor. He went to Garrett. "Stay here. Nathan, there's one more somewhere in this building." He looked at the north corridor. "And there's one person whose name we haven't heard in this building, whose name we should have heard by now." Garrett understood. Hatch. He's not the type to be in Los Angeles managing board members while the prototype is 4 hours north. He's here. Nathan looked at the prototype. He'd want to be here. "Be careful," Garrett said, which was not something he said often. Nathan went through the north corridor. It ran 30 feet and turned right, and the turn opened into a stairwell going up. He went up one flight and came out on the second floor of the building, which was a single large space that had been divided into a working office. Desk, monitors, a secure phone unit, a wall covered in printed satellite images and financial diagrams, and what appeared to be a timeline stretching back years. Roland Hatch was standing at the window. He was bigger than his 15-year-old photo had suggested, or maybe the photo had been taken at a different point in a life that had accumulated weight in the way some men do when they've been carrying something for a long time. He was wearing a plain jacket, and he was looking out the window at the mountain terrain, and he didn't turn around when Nathan came in. "I heard the noise," Hatch said. His voice was level, unhurried. I knew what it meant. Nathan moved into the room, keeping angles, watching the man's hands. "Step away from the window." "I'm not armed." Hatch turned. His face was the same flat expression from the photograph, but older, with deep lines around the eyes that came from years of squinting at things from a distance. He looked at Nathan with the attention of someone who has spent a long time imagining an adversary and is now making the comparison. "You're Mercer, former SEAL 6. You've been helping the Langford woman." "Step away from the window," Nathan said again. Hatch stepped away. He moved to the desk and stopped there, which Nathan noted and adjusted his position accordingly. "I know your record," Hatch said. "You're good at this, which makes it ironic that you're on the wrong side of it. Where's the rest of your security? There's no one else. You've accounted for everyone." He said it without apparent distress. "I designed this facility to be run by a small team. Large teams create exposure." He looked at Nathan steadily. "I want you to understand something before this ends. You can tell it to a prosecutor. The prosecutor will hear a story about a man who stole technology and had people killed," Hatch said. "Which is true as far as it goes. But the reason is that you lost your program and you spent 15 years rebuilding it because you believe you were right," Nathan said. "I've read the file. I know what Prometheus Gate was designed to do." He looked at Hatch. "I've also read what it actually did, in 3 limited deployments, what it did to civilians." Something moved across Hatch's face. The program had errors in its early parameters. The targeting precision was, "People died," Nathan said. "In a country they'd never heard of Prometheus Gate, during an election they were trying to have, in a blackout that lasted 4 days in July. People died because the wrong infrastructure was disrupted and the contingency planning didn't account for the hospitals." He kept his voice flat. "Not angry. Anger was a tool, and it was the wrong tool for this. That's what your program did with the technology that existed 15 years ago. And you want to do it again with technology that's 6 times more powerful." Hatch was quiet. "Daniel Langford understood what it would become," Nathan said. "That's why he spent the rest of his life making sure you couldn't get to it." "Daniel Langford was naive about the realities of geopolitical leverage," Hatch said. "But the conviction in it had shifted. Something had moved in the older man's posture, some small structural thing. The technology in the right hands. Nobody's hands are right for this, Nathan said. That's the thing you never figured out. The program wasn't shut down because of politics or budget or institutional cowardice. It was shut down because what you built couldn't be contained to the uses you intended. The moment it exists and works, it becomes available to whoever acquires it, in whatever way they choose to use it. He looked at Hatch. Who's the buyer? Hatch said nothing. The federal case is built, Nathan said. The documentation is in the hands of a U.S. attorney right now. Caulfield has given a statement. Your financial network is documented. The buyer is the one piece that isn't on the table yet, and it's the piece that determines whether people understand the full scope of what this was. He held Hatch's gaze. Who is the buyer? Another silence. Hatch looked at the window, at the mountain outside, the trees, the sky that was fully light now, the gray gold of early mountain morning. He looked like a man taking stock of something, running numbers in his head, reaching a conclusion he'd been avoiding. A consortium, he said finally. 3 parties, 2 private equity groups in Eastern Europe and a state-adjacent defense contractor in Asia. They weren't buying the technology for themselves. They were brokering it to a government client who has had chronic grid infrastructure vulnerabilities that they've been seeking to weaponize against a neighbor. He stopped. I didn't ask which government. I understood the parameters. Write it down, Nathan said. He put a legal pad from the desk in front of Hatch. Everything you know, names, entities, whatever you have on the buyer consortium. Hatch looked at the legal pad. Then he picked up the pen. He wrote for 6 minutes. Nathan stood and watched and didn't rush him. When Hatch put the pen down, the legal pad had 2 pages of handwriting, names, account numbers, a communication protocol, the name of the intermediary who'd brokered the consortium contact. Nathan photographed both pages. He sent them to the clean federal line. Then he zip-tied Hatch's wrist to the desk chair, which was bolted to the floor, and went back downstairs. Garrett had his phone out and was looking at the screen when Nathan came back through the north corridor. He held it up. Federal response team is 40 minutes out. They got the location confirmation, and apparently your attorney friend in the U.S. Attorney's Office had already been on the phone with DOJ for 2 hours. He looked at Nathan. We have 40 minutes. Enough. Nathan looked at the room. The technical staff still grouped on the west side, the security personnel immobilized, the prototype on its platform. Is everyone accounted for? All technical staff, 5 security, and you went upstairs and came back alone, which means either Hatch isn't up there or he's up there. He's not going anywhere. Garrett looked at Nathan's left side. You're bleeding. Nathan looked down. His jacket was dark on the left side in a way it hadn't been 40 minutes ago, a spreading darkening that was now making itself noticed. He pressed his hand against it. It was a rib area hit, probably a blade. He hadn't fully registered it in the sequence of the fight, which was not unusual. It hurt in the specific sustained way of something that required attention, rather than the sharp way of something that required immediate alarm. I'm aware, he said. That's what I said about my lip, Garrett said. And you're fine. I am fine. Are you fine? Nathan pressed his hand harder against his side. I'm functional, he said, which was a different answer, and Garrett heard the difference and didn't push it. Nathan called Victoria. She answered before the first ring finished. Tell me, she said. Prototype is secure. Hatch is contained. Buyer consortium information is on its way to the federal line right now, set 2 pages, names, and account numbers. He paused. Federal response is 40 minutes out. A silence on her end that lasted about 3 seconds. You're okay? I'm functional. Nathan, I'm okay, he said, because she needed to hear the word, and it was approximately true. How did it go with the prosecutor? She's been on the phone with the deputy AG since 6 a.m. Victoria's voice was careful in the way of someone managing relief. She said the Prometheus Gate documentation was, she said she'd never seen anything like it. She has people working on the buyer consortium already based on the Meridian files. A pause. The buyer consortium information you just sent is going to fill in the piece she needed most. Good. Nathan, her voice changed. Is it over? He looked around the main floor of the facility, at the prototype, at the documentation on the platform, at the sky coming through the high windows, full mountain morning now, clear and cold and completely indifferent to what had just happened inside this building. This part, he said. He heard her exhale. Okay, she said. Okay. And then quietly, come back. He put the phone in his pocket. Garrett was sitting on the edge of the platform, the only seat in the room that wasn't occupied by someone immobilized, eating a granola bar he'd produced from somewhere, which was such a specific Garrett Cole detail that Nathan almost laughed. What? Garrett said. Nothing. Nathan moved to the platform and sat down on the other end of it, carefully, because his left side had strong opinions about sudden movements. He looked at the prototype, the steady green readout. You brought a granola bar. I brought 4. I gave one to the technical staff because one of them looked like she was going to pass out. Garrett looked at Nathan. You want one? No. You should eat something. I was a busboy. I ate staff meal. That was a week ago. It feels longer, Nathan said. They sat in the quiet of the facility with the equipment humming and the morning light coming through the high windows and the sound of 7 people breathing, some of them frightened, some of them resigned, one of them eating a granola bar, and waited for the sound that eventually came. Rotors. 2 helicopters from the south, still distant but getting less so. The specific sound of institutional response arriving at a location where it was genuinely needed. Nathan listened to it get louder and thought about his daughter at Mrs. Okafor's, probably awake by now, probably at the kitchen table with her notebook, drawing rivers into countries that didn't exist yet, but that she was building with the complete confidence of someone who understood that the blank page wasn't empty, it was waiting. He thought about the capital city of Isenfjord with its harbor and its fish market. He thought about Mrs. Okafor saying, come back, and Victoria saying, come back, and the way the same words from 2 different people who had no reason to coordinate had both landed in the same place. He pressed his hand against his left side and held the pressure. The rotors got louder. Garrett finished his granola bar and folded the wrapper with the neat habit of a man who'd spent years in environments where leaving anything behind was a problem. He looked at Nathan. For the record, Garrett said, the granola bar offer stands. For the record, Nathan said, I appreciate the offer. Also for the record, Garrett paused. Good job. It was not the kind of thing they said to each other often, not because they didn't mean it, but because they'd spent enough time in situations where meaning it was so obvious that saying it felt redundant. Nathan looked at the floor for a moment. Then he looked up. You too, he said. The first helicopter set down on the flat ground outside the facility, and then the second, and Nathan heard voices, the organized, directed voices of people who had been briefed on what they were coming into and had a plan for it. And the main entrance of the building came open, and the next chapter of this began, the institutional one, the one with badges and jurisdictions and chains of custody and all the machinery that turns a situation into a case. Nathan stayed where he was on the edge of the platform until a federal agent came to him, which took about 4 minutes, and the agent looked at his side and said something to a colleague, and a moment later a paramedic was there asking questions that Nathan answered as briefly as possible. You need to come with us, the paramedic said. I know, Nathan said. He stood up slowly, which his left side registered its opinion of, and he looked once more at the prototype on the platform with its steady green readout, and at the wall of documentation around it, and at the faces of Hatch's technical team being walked out by federal agents, most of them looking relieved in the complicated way of people who have been waiting to be stopped. He thought about Daniel Langford in a closed session telling the truth about what he'd seen, and going home afterward to build something, and spending 16 years making sure it was as protected as a human being could make a thing. He thought it wasn't a bad way to have spent a life. Then he went with the paramedic, and outside the mountain air was cold and clear, and somewhere in Los Angeles, he knew, a small girl was drawing a capital city on the coast of a country made of ice, planning out where the fish market should go, making something out of a blank page. He held his side and walked into the morning. The hospital in Fresno was the closest trauma facility to the mountain, which was how Nathan ended up spending 2 days in a room that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, staring at a ceiling that had one water stain in the shape of nothing in particular, while a doctor explained that the blade had caught the lower left side between two ribs and that he was fortunate it hadn't gone deeper and that he needed to stop moving around or the sutures would open again. Fortunate, Nathan said. Considerably, the doctor said. She was a small woman in her 40s with the particular manner of someone who had been delivering difficult assessments to people who didn't want to hear them for long enough that she'd learned to lead with the facts. You lost enough blood that you shouldn't have been functional at all. The paramedics' report said you walked out under your own power. I was motivated. Most people are. That doesn't usually make the physics cooperate. She looked at his chart. You have 3 older rib fractures that were never properly treated, and 2 healed injuries in your left shoulder consistent with old work, Nathan said. She looked at him over her glasses with the expression of someone deciding not to pursue a line of questioning. You need 10 days of actual rest, not 4 days and then light activity. 10 days. I have a daughter. Does your daughter require you to lift heavy objects or get into physical altercations? He thought about this. Not typically. Then you can manage, she said, and left. Victoria arrived that afternoon. He heard her before he saw her, a conversation in the hallway with a nurse that had the specific quality of a discussion being concluded quickly by someone accustomed to concluding discussions on their preferred terms. Then the door opened and she came in, and she looked at him in the hospital bed with his left side wrapped and an IV in his arm that he was already calculating how soon he could remove, and her face did something that she wasn't quite managing to prevent it from doing. She sat in the chair beside the bed without speaking for a moment. I'm fine, he said. You were stabbed. The doctor used the word fortunate. The doctor also told me in the hallway that you should have passed out before you made it outside, and that your pain tolerance is, quote, either impressive or deeply concerning. Victoria set a bag on the floor beside the chair, not flowers, which he appreciated, but food from somewhere that wasn't the hospital cafeteria, which he appreciated more. She's leaning toward the second one. Smart doctor, Nathan said. Victoria looked at him. The afternoon light was coming through the hospital window at a low angle, the kind of flat gold that November afternoons in the Central Valley produced, and it made the room look warmer than it was. She'd driven up from Los Angeles alone. He'd told her she didn't have to. She'd told him that was not a relevant piece of information. Hatch was formally arrested and charged this morning, she said. Federal charges, theft of proprietary technology, conspiracy, 2 counts of murder in the second degree for Hale and Chu, and a separate set of charges related to the Prometheus Gate activity that the DOJ classified unit is apparently dealing with in a different proceeding. She folded her hands in her lap. Caulfield has entered a cooperation agreement. Richard Fossey, the IT director, has been arrested. The buyer consortium has been identified. 2 of the 3 parties have already had assets frozen by Treasury. The third? Working on it. The intermediary Hatch named gave them a significant lead. She paused. The U.S. attorney told me this morning that the Prometheus Gate file alone is going to be active for 2 years. There are implications across 3 administrations that nobody has wanted to look at. They'll look now, Nathan said. They'll look now, Victoria agreed. She was quiet for a moment. Priya is safe. She's back home. Her husband flew down from Sacramento the day it broke in the news. And apparently she told him the entire story at the kitchen table over dinner, and he sat through all of it without interrupting, which she says is how she knew she'd married the right person. Nathan thought about that. And her work? The Helix 7 documentation? All of it preserved. The data drive you pulled from the facility has the reverse engineering work Hatch's team did, which is actually useful. It identified 2 structural weaknesses in the prototype that Priya and I didn't know existed. Victoria looked at him with a slight expression that he'd come to recognize as her version of dry humor. So in a completely unintended way, Roland Hatch contributed to making the technology better. Don't put that in the press release. It was not going in the press release. He almost smiled. It pulled at his left side, and he decided against it. Garrett? Your friend is fine. Split lip, some bruising. He drove back to San Diego the day after the federal team arrived and sent me a text that said, and I'm quoting, "Bill me for the granola bar," with a Los Angeles business address. She looked at Nathan. I sent him a case of the good kind. He'll deny caring about that. He texted back a single thumbs up, so yes. Nathan looked at the ceiling, the water stain, the nothing shape of it. Outside the window, a tree was doing the thing November trees do, holding the last of its leaves with the particular stubbornness of something not ready to let go yet. Lily, he said, is with Mrs. Okafor and will be with Mrs. Okafor until you can travel. Victoria said it directly. I spoke with her this morning. She told me your daughter beat Garrett's associate at cards 3 nights running and has started teaching Ptolemy to sit on command, which apparently is not going well, but which Lily finds very funny. He was quiet for a moment. She knows I was hurt? She knows you had a work accident and you're in a hospital and you're going to be fine and you'll come get her when the doctor says you can travel. Victoria held his eyes. I told her you were going to be fine before I knew you were going to be fine, which I will not apologize for because she's 8 and she needed to hear it. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the steadiness that he'd come to understand was not the absence of feeling, but a structure built over it, a thing she'd learned to do young, maybe the same year her father came home from a world he never talked about and started building walls around his daughter without explaining why. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me. You have a daughter. Someone had to tell her. I mean for all of it, Nathan said. Victoria was quiet. She looked at the bag of food on the floor, and then at the window, and then back at him. I've been thinking about something, she said. Tell me. The company needs to change. She said it with the directness of someone who has been working toward a decision and has arrived. Not what we build. What we build is, the technology is real and it's important, and my father was right that it matters. But the way the company operates, the way the technology is protected and deployed and governed, none of that was built for what this technology actually is. She looked at Nathan. Hatch wanted to use it as a weapon. That was the threat this time. Next time it might be someone else with a different application and a better approach to avoiding detection. You're thinking oversight, Nathan said. I'm thinking an independent organization. Something with authority to audit how the technology is being used across any licensee, any deployment, any government contract. Something that can't be bought because its entire mandate is to be unbuyable. She paused. My father tried to stop Hatch by burying information, by making the knowledge hard to steal. That worked for 15 years and then it didn't. She held Nathan's gaze. The information can't be buried anymore. The technology exists and it's going to be deployed, and the only way to keep it from becoming a weapon is to make every use of it visible. Nathan thought about this. That's a hard organization to build. Yes. And a harder one to sustain because the people who want to misuse the technology are going to spend money and time trying to undermine whatever oversight structure you create. I know. She didn't look away, which is why I need someone who understands both the threat and the technology. Someone who isn't connected to the existing power structures that Hatch was able to corrupt. She paused. I'm asking you, Nathan, not as a protector, not as security, as a partner in building something that actually works. The room was quiet. The IV dripped. Outside the tree held its last leaves. He thought about what he'd been doing for 11 months. The bus rides, the restaurant plates, the apartment with the broken elevator, and the kitchen window where you could accidentally make eye contact with a woman making oatmeal. He told himself it was for Lily, that disappearing was what responsible parenthood looked like after the year they'd had. And there was truth in that. But there was also the other truth, the less comfortable one, that hiding was something he'd gotten very good at, and that getting good at hiding is not the same thing as being okay. He thought about Sarah. Not the hospital room. He tried not to think about the hospital room, and he was better at that now than he used to be. He thought about her in the kitchen on a Sunday morning, before everything, making coffee and reading something on her laptop and laughing at something he hadn't heard. He thought about the way she looked at him when he came home from places he couldn't fully describe. She never asked him to explain those places. She said once that she'd married him knowing he would always be someone who ran toward the problem, and that she'd decided the only thing she could do was make sure he always had somewhere to come back to. He'd spent 18 months trying to stop being someone who ran toward the problem. He wasn't sure that had worked. He wasn't sure it was supposed to. I have conditions, he said. Victoria's expression shifted, something in it easing, though she kept it contained. You always have conditions. Lily comes first, every time, without negotiation. If something requires me to be somewhere that isn't where she needs me, I'm where she needs me. Agreed, Victoria said immediately. The organization has to be genuinely independent, not housed inside your company. Separate governance, separate funding, separate legal identity. You can be a founder, but you can't be an operational control. That was my intention. And I want Priya involved, not as an employee, as an advisor with actual authority over the technical audit process. She understands the foundational science better than anyone, and she's demonstrated that she has the judgment to know what's dangerous. Victoria nodded slowly. I'll ask her. I think she'll say yes. And Garrett, Nathan said, your card game losing friend. He runs a security consulting firm. The organization will need people who can do what we did in the Sierra Nevada, but with authorization and resources and without the part where I get stabbed. He paused. He's good, and he's trustworthy in the specific way that matters, which is that he can be trusted to tell me when I'm wrong. That's a very specific qualification. It's the most important one. Nathan looked at her. Those are my conditions. Victoria looked at him for a moment, then she said, I accept all of them, with the clarity of someone who had thought this through far enough in advance to know that the conditions would be reasonable before she'd heard them. He believed her. He'd believed her about Lily in the auxiliary office of her building, and he'd been right, and the instinct had not degraded. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. They looked at each other across the hospital room, and the afternoon light moved, and the IV dripped, and nothing about it was clean or dramatic or cinematic. It was two tired people in a room that smelled like antiseptic, making a decision about what to build next. And there was something in the ordinariness of it that Nathan found more solid than any version of it would have been with more ceremony. He ate the food she'd brought. It was from a Lebanese restaurant 3 blocks from the hospital that she'd apparently spent 20 minutes researching because she'd noticed in several days of working in adjacent rooms that he ate actual food rather than convenience food when given a choice. He didn't comment on this. She didn't draw attention to it. He ate the kibbeh and the rice and the fattoush that was slightly wilted from the drive, and it was the best meal he'd had in longer than he could account for, which was something he thought about but didn't say. She stayed until the nurse came to do an evening check, and then she stood up and gathered her things with the brisk efficiency of someone with a 4-hour drive ahead and a company that had been through a crisis and needed its CEO to actually appear in it. At the door, she stopped. Your daughter, she said. In Mrs. Okafor's kitchen this morning. She was drawing at the table on the maps she makes. She paused. Mrs. Okafor told her you'd been hurt and were going to be fine. And Lily looked up from the map and said, he always comes back, just like that. Said it like a fact. Victoria looked at Nathan. I thought you should know that. He didn't say anything. Mrs. Okafor said she wasn't sure if it was the most heartbreaking thing she'd ever heard or the most reassuring, Victoria said. I think it's both. She left. He lay in the hospital bed and looked at the ceiling and thought about his daughter at a kitchen table saying it like a fact, with the complete confidence of someone who has decided that a thing is true and arranged the rest of her world around it. He came back. That was the least complicated thing he'd ever been certain of. He was discharged on the morning of the 4th day, after the doctor made him walk the corridor twice and checked his sutures and told him again that 10 days meant 10 days, and he said yes in a tone that apparently satisfied her because she signed the paperwork. Garrett had sent a car, not a driver, just a car, dropped at the hospital by one of his associates with the keys in an envelope at the front desk, and a note that said, "Don't bleed on the upholstery." Nathan drove himself back to Los Angeles on a clear November morning with the Central Valley opening up wide and flat around him, the mountains at his back, the city pulling him forward the way cities pull you when something in the city has become specific to you. He went to Mrs. Okafor's first. He could hear Lily through the door before he knocked. She was talking, rapidly, the way she talked when she was excited about something, and he heard the word harbor and the word tidal, and what sounded like an argument with someone about the structural integrity of a fictional bridge. He knocked. The talking stopped. There was a sound of a chair scraping and then feet crossing the floor, and the door opened. Lily looked at him. He looked at her. She had a pencil behind her ear and a smudge of graphite on her chin, and she was wearing a sweatshirt that was slightly too large, and she looked at him with her mother's eyes for a long moment. Then she said, "You look terrible." "Thank you," Nathan said. "Mrs. Okafor said not to hug you too hard." Mrs. Okafor is correct. She hugged him anyway, carefully, both arms around him and her face against his chest and her shoulders up near her ears, in the specific posture of someone hugging a person they've been worried about and are trying not to be demonstrative about being worried about. He put one hand on the back of her head. They stood there for a moment. "I drew a canal system," she said into his shirt, "for Isen Fjord. Mrs. Okafor says real capital cities near water usually have them." Mrs. Okafor is right again. She said Venice has like 200, something like that. Lily pulled back and looked up at him. "Are you done with the work thing?" He thought about how to answer that. That particular work thing, yes. But there's other work things now. There might be. He looked at her. Is that okay? She considered this with the focused attention that she gave to most things worth thinking about. Is it important? Yes. Like actually important, or like grown-up important, where things seem important but actually aren't? He almost smiled. His left side cooperated this time. Actually important. Okay, she said. Then yes. She stepped back and the decision was made, and she went back to the kitchen table and the map notebook, and Nathan came inside and Mrs. Okafor handed him tea without asking. And Ptolemy looked at him from the windowsill with the unreconstructed contempt of a cat that has survived significant disruption to its routine and is choosing not to forgive easily. He stayed for 2 hours. He drank the tea and ate some of the jollof rice that Mrs. Okafor produced from somewhere, despite it not being a mealtime, because Mrs. Okafor was a person who expressed care through food, and Nathan had learned not to argue with this. He sat at the kitchen table while Lily showed him the canal system and explained the logic of it, the tidal flow, the lock mechanisms, the way the harbor district connected to the commercial center. And he listened to all of it with his full attention, because it turned out that actually listening to your kid explain a fictional canal system was something he hadn't been doing enough of, and it was genuinely interesting. Before he left, he sat down with Lily properly. Not at the kitchen table, in the living room, just the two of them on the couch, while Mrs. Okafor made noise in the kitchen with dishes. "I want to tell you about your mom," he said. Lily looked at him. She went very still in the way she went still when something mattered. "Not the hard parts, those too, eventually. But tonight I want to tell you something she said once that I've been thinking about." He looked at his hands. "She said she knew I would always run toward the hard thing, whatever the hard thing was, and she said she'd made peace with that because—" He stopped, started again. "She said the kind of person who runs toward hard things is also the kind of person who actually stays, who doesn't leave when the ordinary hard things come around, not the dramatic hard things, the everyday ones." Lily was listening with her full attention. "I've been trying to not run toward hard things for the past 1.5 years, Nathan said, "and I think I thought that was the right thing to do. For you." He looked at her. "But I think maybe what she meant was that the running toward and the staying are the same thing. They come from the same place." Lily was quiet for a moment. "She was smart," she said finally. "She was the smartest person I've ever met." "Smarter than Victoria?" He thought about Victoria in a conference room making a man who had been embedded in a conspiracy for 4 years decide to cooperate, and Victoria organizing a federal evidence package at 4 in the morning, and Victoria driving 4 hours to a hospital with Lebanese food she'd researched. "Different kind of smart," he said. "Both very smart." Lily appeared to accept this as a reasonable answer. "I like her," she said. "I know. She came to Mrs. Okafor's house 2 days ago. She brought pastries, and she knew Ptolemy's name, and she didn't try to make me feel better about you being in the hospital by talking too much." Lily looked at him. "She just sat there and showed me something on her phone about canal systems in real cities, like she thought I'd actually be interested." "Were you?" "Obviously." A pause. "She knew I would be. She asked Mrs. Okafor first what I'd been working on." Nathan looked at his daughter. She was 8 years old, and she was a clear-eyed reader of people, which she got from both of her parents, and she was telling him something without quite saying it, which she also got from both of her parents. "Okay," he said. Okay, what? Okay, I heard you, Nathan said. She seemed satisfied with this and went back to the kitchen to reclaim her notebook. And Nathan said goodbye to Mrs. Okafor, who pressed his arm at the door and told him he looked better and was clearly lying but meant well, and he drove back to the apartment on Hayworth Avenue where the elevator was working for once, and let himself in and stood in the living room. The apartment was the same, small and quiet and arranged around two people's lives. Lily's drawings on the fridge, his jacket on the hook by the door, the particular quality of a home that has been inhabited by people who know each other well. He'd been afraid, somewhere in the past week, that coming back would feel different, that the thing that had been forced out into the open would have changed the shape of the ordinary life around it. It didn't feel different. It felt exactly like what it was, a place where someone lived with his kid and worked nights and took the bus and made peanut butter sandwiches. It was still all of that. It was also now the place where that chapter was finishing and the next one beginning, and both of those could be true at the same time without one canceling out the other. He sat down on the couch and called Victoria. She answered on the second ring. "You're home." "Just got in." He looked around the apartment. "How's the company?" "Complicated in the expected ways and manageable in the unexpected ones." A pause. Most of the board is supportive. 3 members are doing the thing where they express concern in a way that actually means they're nervous about liability. We'll manage it. Another pause. "Priya said yes, by the way. I called her this morning." "To the oversight organization?" "She had conditions too. She wants the audit process to be published. Every finding, every compliance review made publicly available with a 1-year delay for anything commercially sensitive." Victoria's voice had the warmth in it of someone describing a thing they'd found unexpectedly right. She said if it's not transparent, it's just another layer of gatekeeping, and gatekeeping is what allowed Hatch to operate for 15 years. "She's right," Nathan said. "I told her that. She said she knew." A pause. "I think she and I are going to get along very well, and that it's going to be occasionally exhausting. That's usually how it works with people worth working with. Experience talking?" He thought about Garrett, about the various people over the years who had been worth working with and occasionally exhausting. "Yes," he said. They talked for another 20 minutes. Not about the organization, about the practical things, the immediate things, legal structure, timeline for Garrett's involvement, how to approach the international components of the oversight mandate, where to actually put the office. Victoria had thoughts on all of it. Organized thoughts, the kind that suggested she'd been working through the problem on the drive back from Fresno, which he would have been surprised to learn she hadn't. He had thoughts too. It turned out that 11 months of bussing tables had not eliminated his ability to think strategically, which was perhaps unsurprising, but felt worth noting. At the end of it, she said, "Nathan." "Yeah." "I'm glad you were in that parking garage." He looked at the ceiling of the apartment. Different ceiling than the hospital, no water stain, just plain white. "I left 3 plates on the trunk of someone's car," he said. "The world will survive the plates." Stavros was pretty upset about it. "I'll send him a case of the good wine," Victoria said. He almost laughed. His side, at this distance from the injury and the hospital and the mountain, was generous enough to let him. He'd appreciate that. "Good night, Nathan." "Good night." He put the phone down and sat in the quiet of the apartment. Somewhere in the building above him, a neighbor was playing music low, something with a slow beat that came through the ceiling as a pulse more than a sound. Outside on Hayworth Avenue, a bus went by, the particular mechanical sound of the line he'd taken home from Bellomo 100 times, and he listened to it diminish into the distance. He thought about what it cost to hide. Not just the practical costs, the cash economy, the stripped-down life, the professional expertise reduced to clearing plates, but the internal cost, the price paid in the currency of who you let yourself be. He'd told himself it was protective. He told himself that a smaller life was a safer life for the person who needed him most, and there was truth in that, a real truth. But there was another truth underneath it, one he hadn't wanted to examine, which was that he'd been punishing himself. Not for anything he'd done. He'd done plenty of things worth examining, but the hiding wasn't about those. He'd been punishing himself for surviving a year that Sarah hadn't, for still being functional and capable and effective in a world she was no longer in, for the fact that his particular skill set, the one she'd loved him with full knowledge of, had not been able to do the one thing that would have mattered most. You can't fight cancer with combat training. He'd known that. He'd known it the whole time. But grief isn't rational, and guilt especially isn't rational. And the thing he'd done was try to reduce himself to a size where those feelings had less surface area to land on. It hadn't worked. It had just made the apartment on Hayworth Avenue smaller. He understood this now. He wasn't sure he was entirely done with it. Grief doesn't resolve like a plot problem. It just changes shape over time. But he understood it, which was different from where he'd been a week ago. A week ago, he'd been a man who abused tables and was running from the thing he was. Now he was a man with sutures in his left side and a daughter who drew canal systems and a decision to build something that mattered. And he was still running from some things, probably. But at least he knew the direction. That was enough. You don't get more than that usually. You get to know the direction. 3 weeks later, the elevator was broken again. Nathan carried 2 bags of groceries up 4 flights of stairs, slowly, because his left side still had opinions about stairs, and unlocked the apartment door and found Lily at the kitchen table with her notebook and Mrs. Okafor's canal system research printed on 6 pages and spread across the table, cross-referencing them with her fictional geography with the systematic concentration of a future engineer. Victoria was at the counter making coffee. This had become, over the past 3 weeks, a thing that happened. She had an office in Culver City still, but the organizational work, the building of the oversight structure, the legal architecture, the international frameworks, had migrated in the way that things migrate when people are working toward something together, toward wherever Nathan was, which was often the apartment. She used the kitchen counter as a standing desk, and Lily had integrated her into the household ecosystem with the practical acceptance of a child who has good instincts about people. Ptolemy, who Victoria had started bringing to the apartment on Saturdays because Mrs. Okafor's building didn't allow pets on weekends according to a new management rule that appeared to have been created specifically to inconvenience Ptolemy, was on the windowsill. He had revised his assessment of Victoria after she'd produced, on her second visit, a specific brand of cat treat that Ptolemy apparently approved of. He had not revised his assessment of Nathan, but Nathan had accepted this. "You carried the stairs," Victoria said, which was her way of noting that he'd used the stairs, inflected with the question of whether he should have. "The elevator is broken." "It's always broken." "That's why we're moving," Lily said, without looking up from the map. Nathan looked at Lily. "We're moving?" Victoria found an apartment. Lily looked up now, with the expression of someone delivering information they consider to have been already settled. "It has an elevator that works, and a room I can use as a studio for the maps, and it's closer to school." Nathan looked at Victoria. Victoria was holding the coffee she'd poured with both hands and looking at him with the expression she wore when she had done something she was confident was correct, but was interested in his response. "I found it 3 days ago. I mentioned it to Lily when I picked her up from Mrs. Okafor's." "You mentioned it to Lily first," Nathan said. "She's a stakeholder, and I thought she'd have useful opinions on the studio space." "I did," Lily said. "The light comes in from the south, which is better for drawing." Nathan looked at his daughter, and then at Victoria, and then at the groceries he was still holding, and then at the apartment he'd lived in for 11 months. The kitchen window that looked into Mrs. Okafor's kitchen, the busted elevator, the walls that he'd moved into because they were cheap and anonymous and asked nothing of him. "Is it on the 4th floor?" he asked. "3rd, Victoria said. "Working elevator." "Is it near the bus line?" 2 blocks. "Does it have—" "Nathan," Victoria said. He stopped. She was looking at him with the directness that he'd stopped trying to outlast several weeks ago because she was better at it than he was. "I'm not asking you to do anything except look at the apartment," she said. "The rest of it is your decision. All of it is always your decision." She paused. "But you've been in this apartment for 11 months because you needed somewhere to be that didn't require you to be anything. And I think you know you're not there anymore." He looked at her. She was right. She was often right in a way that was occasionally exhausting, which he'd told her, and she'd said she'd heard that before. He put the groceries on the counter. "Okay," he said. "Okay, we'll look at it?" "Okay, we'll look at it," he said. Lily made a sound of quiet satisfaction and went back to the canal system. Ptolemy shifted on the windowsill and reconsidered his position on Nathan slightly. Outside on Hayworth Avenue, the city moved the way it always moved, indifferent and relentless and full of the particular noise of 10 million people living their particular lives within earshot of each other. Nathan stood in the kitchen of a small apartment that had held him and his daughter through the worst of it, and he felt the gratitude for that without the guilt, which was new, and he thought about Daniel Langford sitting in a closed hearing room telling the truth at considerable personal cost, and about a girl at 8 years old inheriting a company she didn't fully understand yet, and about the long work of making something right out of something that went wrong. He thought about Sarah saying that running toward and staying are the same thing when they come from the right place. He thought she was right. He thought she'd been right about most things, and that the ongoing work of his life was figuring out which of her right things applied to the version of it he was still living, without her, with their daughter, in a world that kept producing hard problems and waiting to see who would run toward them. The coffee smelled good. He poured himself a cup. Lily was explaining something about tidal gates to Victoria, who was listening with genuine interest and asking questions that were better than they needed to be. And Ptolemy had come down from the windowsill and was sitting on the table next to the map notebook with the proprietary confidence of a cat who has decided a space belongs to him. And Nathan stood in the kitchen and drank his coffee and let all of it be exactly what it was. Not fixed, not finished, not resolved in the clean way that things get resolved in stories where the machinery of it is too visible. Just continuing. Moving forward with all its weight, and all its complication and all its specific ordinary beauty, which turns out to be the only kind there is. That was enough. It was, in the end, more than enough.